Thank you all for being here tonight at our February 11th meeting of the 7-Eleven Committee relating to elementary school space. I'll call the meeting to order, and let's have a pledge to the flag. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. Now we have an agenda before us tonight. I'll need an approval for the agenda.
I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda as written?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Dimitri's gone.
Yeah, Dimitri won't be joining us tonight. He's not feeling well. So it'll be just the 10 of us tonight. Approval of the minutes is next. And again, with compliments to Mary Ann for the
Terrific job.
really just the best minutes. So detailed and so easy to read.
Thank you.
Now, Mary Ann, was there, I didn't quite understand the correction.
Hank's awesome editing eye. I had just written the description of the grade configuration. There was K3 and a 4-6 discussion, and I had written K3 and a 3-6.
See, I went back and looked, and still didn't
Yeah,
see it.
as I said.
I think that falls into that personal.
I don't know. I think Hank's in the wrong profession. I think he should be
Minor infraction, only 2 lashes.
Yeah.
It was just one number.
But that's big deal. Mr. Proof here.
Okay, thank you for that. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes? And if so, take a motion to approve as amended.
I move to approve.
Second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, comments from the public. So I do have Laura Fulmer from Valley Oak Charter, who's here tonight to talk to us. So welcome. And Laura, can you just give us your position at Valley Oak Charter,
Yeah,
please?
I'm the director at Valley Oak.
Okay.
I've been in that position since 2003. Prior to that, I taught at Matilaha and Topa. Okay, so I'm here tonight because there was an article that was published in the paper the other day, and I wanted to let you know that the reporter had contacted me prior to that, and we had set up a tentative time for her to meet with me. I had told her in an email that what she had sent to me was not completely accurate and that it would be good if we could talk, and then the article came out. And I'm a big believer that, especially in a small community like this, it's really, really good for us all to stay on perfectly full disclosure basis with one another. So I wanted to make sure that this committee is aware of the fact that Proposition 39, as it deals with facilities, and because the state's kind of crazy, they give that number to several different things, so that's an energy one too. But going back to the facilities, actually doesn't have anything to do with us. That law was written to make sure that programs in charter schools that had an in-classroom component had access to equal opportunities as far as facilities are concerned. Valley Oak Charter is an independent study program. Although we are a hybrid, at the time that Prop 30 was put into place, there really wasn't a hybrid. You either were an on-site kids in the classroom, or you were an independent study and you didn't come into a classroom at all. So at that time, the people who put together that Proposition 39 basically excluded independent study schools from that. So because our program is, in the minds of our friends at the state, not a program that needs a site, we're not included in that. So there really is no conflict. There's no problem at all. Would we love to have some facilities at the district? Absolutely. Are we in a place that's kind of difficult for us right now? Yes. We have a property that right now we can't develop because of the water problem, and we have a site that we're on that has now been in the process of being sold. So, we're kind of a little concerned. However, it's not the district's fault. The district did nothing improper. Everything that they've been doing has been above board. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of it, and to answer any questions that you might have about the whole situation.
Well, there was a question that we posed to Lori. So Lori and
I know it's
Laura.
Laura.
That the board, I believe it was Glenn, had posed to Lori about if you were to look at a site, would there be any site that of OUSD's elementary schools that would be inappropriate for you to be housed?
You know, we've got two things going here. We've got my feelings and my community's feelings. Years ago, 2 superintendents ago, we were offered, actually, Summit School, because the district was talking about closing at that time. And my community went, oh, we can't drive that far. We can't drive that far. Now, I did a long-term subposition there, and I didn't mind driving it, but that's the way it is. So other than that far away, no. Actually, we all lust after Teresa's property out in San Antonio, because Teresa and I did our teaching together, our individual teaching, because that's where our program started. When John Shiflett put this program together under the auspices of the Ojai Unified School District, that's where we were situated. So we have kind of a penchant for that area. But we're really not picky. We only have programming 12 hours a week. We're there on campus with our kids from 9 to 1 on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. That's it. Everything else is handled off-site. So we could be a really good sharer with anything that come up.
And could you be, is on a campus with older kids, for example, or?
Absolutely. In fact,
younger kids,
I've
or?
said to Lori after she'd been at this meeting last time around that in many ways our program and the Chaparral program make real good sense to be together because they have the same sort of thing. Their students are also doing a form of independent study. They're only on campus for periods of time that are not huge. We have a lot in common as far as that's concerned. But our program is so really different than anything that is offered at any other school campus that we're going to kind of be the oddball to begin with anyway. But we have a wonderful group of families and students who are taking charge of their education and who are very progressive in their thoughts, and we are a very inclusive community. So wherever we end up, I'm sure we're going to do just fine with whoever our neighbors are.
And are you at 75 right now?
We are at 75. We have a wait list of 16. Teresa is our
A wait list of 60?
16, oh my gosh.
Oh, 16,
16,
okay.
yeah. And that always changes because, in fact, we had a student graduate out of our program about 2 weeks ago. So that opened up a spot and we were able to add another student into the
Just
program.
rolling admissions?
It kind of rolls. And you know, to be honest with you, homeschooling isn't for everybody. It really, it's just not. So we'll have some families who come to us and they're with us for a short period of time. And then by kind of mutual agreement, we move them on back into a traditional public school program. But the ones who are with us, who have been, we have a lot of families who, that's all they do is homeschool. They've homeschooled since day one. They've never been part of a public or a private structured program. So for those families, we're there to support their needs. They're taxpayers too.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you for coming and straightening the
Absolutely.
record.
Oh, yeah.
We appreciate that.
And it's hard because even tonight I double checked on Prop 39 on the CDE website to see if they've updated it, and they haven't. So it still basically leaves that kind of hanging out there. But it's a difference between shall and may. So districts shall
There's a
offer
very, very
property
big difference
to schools who
between
have an in-class attendance, and they may offer it to schools like ours that are a hybrid program.
Mm-hmm.
You have questions, Steve?
Yes, thank you. According to the extremely accurate minutes that we have here,
Done very well by Ms. Wright.
last week Lori said you are currently using 4 classrooms and an office.
Well, we're using 4 classrooms plus either a computer lab or a kitchen or an off-site class because we actually have 5 classes going simultaneously. So some of our kids go over to Oak Grove campus. We have an agreement with them to use their tennis courts. Some of our kids will be up cooking in the kitchen facilities there at the church. Sometimes, when Lori's doing a birding class right now, the kids will actually get in our vans and go over to the meadows. So really, we would need, if we were trying to move to another site, we would need at least 5 classrooms, 2 offices, and a library. We can't possibly do it with less than that. Well, we could throw yurts out on our property over there and figure it out. But to really be, what we
Okay, it
need.
sounds like you're making do with less than that right now, which is why I asked.
We are. We're a little crowded where we are right now, but we're much less crowded than we were in our previous site. For years, we were over at the Wesleyan Church, and that was very tight. So, no, we make do.
Okay. Of the 75 that you have enrolled and of the 16 that you have on a waiting list, do you have a sense of how many of those are people who live in the Ojai school district boundaries
Yeah, well, I can-
and are therefore a subtraction from what otherwise might be
Might be in
OUSD
a
enrollment?
school, yeah. Currently, those numbers are about 2/3 and 1/3. We have approximately 26 students who are currently enrolled in our program who are from outside district. So that
Okay.
leaves us with, the difference there. On our wait list right now, I can't swear to this, but I think most of the children who are on the wait list, it's probably the same kind of mix. Because here's the thing, people hear about us one of two ways. They hear about us because their kid is just having a really not positive experience in a traditional school program, whether that's public or private, and somebody says, oh, well, you hear about the charter? Or they hear about us because there are families who are into homeschooling and have been into it, and they hear it through those groups. Those are the families who generally come to us from outside of the area. I would say probably the vast majority of kids who come to us from inside district are kids for whom, for whatever reason, the traditional program simply isn't working right now. A lot of those kids, probably at least 40 to 50% of them, will be with us for a year or two and then funnel back into the traditional program again. Sometimes we're just a little stopgap for kids who are just really having a problem or a family who's having issues, and they just need a little more room, and we can offer them that, a little more leeway in what's going on. The student doesn't have to be at school 6.5-hour day, 5 days a week. So if you have a child who's resisting going to school and every morning is an argument, something like ours where we say, well, they can come just a little bit and do their work at home is like a godsend. And because kids are kids, sometimes they grow past that. And then they move back into a traditional program.
Another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that there are synergies at all between what you offer and the district? Like, do you ever think there are more students than are currently served by an independent study program at Ojai Unified?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think Hank would agree with that because I know that the Apex program over at Nordhoff, generally speaking, has more people wanting to be in it than can be in it. But, the district it's an equation. You can't have more than 20% of your kids doing independent study. If you do, you fall into my ballpark. You get to do the SB 740 funding determination every few years, and that's just a blast. You don't want to go there. And the funding is different. Remember, the funding is different for independent study than it is for traditional site-based classes. So there's a whole money kind of component involved in that. But I would think that, in my opinion anyway, from what I've seen being in the charter movement for 13 years now, there is a big push towards more individualized education. Kids want and expect to be able to have some kind of impact on that part of their lives because we basically kind of raised them to think that they get to have impact on everything, right? As parents, we said, oh, you can make these decisions, you can be part of this. So now they want to be part of their education as well. And there is such a huge amount of information available on the internet, open education resources. You can go get a college degree online if you want to. You can just plug in and do it. It's just kind of a different world now. We're not in the 50s anymore. It's not the same thing. And I think more and more you're going to see a push towards more alternatives, more progressive ideas. We're a very, very small component of that because we're here in this little tiny valley and we're tiny. But in the charter movement in general, there's a lot of growth in that area.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Laura.
I guess I do have a question,
Yeah.
another question. Laura, how soon would you, like if you were to be utilizing a portion of a campus or a campus, how soon does that work into your plans in terms of your other project?
I would like to say that I had a definite plan, and at one point in time I did. But The drought and the building department have kind of laid waste to that plan. I would imagine that we will be looking for something for next year, whether that's to work with whoever purchases our site where we are now, or whether that's looking to some kind of outside area. I do not at this point see us being able to develop our property that we purchased in Miners Oak until the drought situation is resolved. At this point in time, we purchased it with a will serve letter from Miners Oaks Water, but Miners Oaks is out of water. So we've been referred over to Casitas Municipal Water District, and they're out of water. So we're basically sitting with this will serve letter that we cannot do anything further to develop our property until somebody says, yes, we can give you the water, and nobody has water to give us.
And then I had another question. You're looking at purchasing, or you have purchased a property, so you have funds to build a property. So if you were to move to a site, would you see yourself having the resources to fix up a campus to the degree that it would need to be? For instance, we have a report that states how much money needs to be spent, guesstimate, or can be spent on each campus. Do you have a budget then that you could make those repairs yourself?
Well, it's hard to say without knowing an actual figure, Mary Ann, but I will say that we have a substantial unallocated reserve every year. We end the year with money. That's because I'm the cheapest person in the universe, and it's a small school, so I can do that. So right now we have, I think it's a little over 120,000 in unallocated reserves. And when you look at that from the perspective of a program whose ADA revenue, we only get state revenue. We don't get any federal revenues. So state revenues come into us and a little bit from lottery. We're generally somewhere around $450,000 a year. That's our whole budget. And we've put aside, we purchased the property pretty much in its entirety. We still have a very small second that we've been paying off on it. But the property was $200,000, we paid $180. And now we're back up to something over $120. So I don't see that as being a problem. Our problem from the perspective of developing the site that we purchased, besides just the water issue, is that about 2 years ago, the state of California decided to clarify another one of its rules. And that clarification put us in a position where we're no longer allowed to use our unallocated reserves to develop the property without tripping the now we're a public works project. And those of you who are familiar with public works projects know that it comes with lots and lots of strings and lots of extra costs. So between that and the water issue, it's put a little damper on the fervor with which we were moving forward. But we still feel that we're going to be able to put this together one way or another.
But you would be allowed under that clarification to spend your unallotted reserves for fixing up a campus?
We can do it, yes. It's just that once you become a public works project, so the second I take $1 out of those unallocated reserves, I automatically trigger us to be a public works project. We're under the direction of the state architects, all those fun-filled things that add into that. If we don't, if we just step back and say, well, we're just going to raise funds and figure out how to make this work, as long as we're only spending donated funds or funds that we've raised elsewhere, we can stave that off, and all we have to do is deal with our friends at the County of Ventura. And I've dealt with them before, so that's not too big of a problem.
Thanks again.
You're saying none of your unallocated reserves were donated funds, they were all state funds?
No, there is a certain portion of them, but it's not a huge amount. We don't do fundraising fees. We're not a fundraising group. We may have to become one eventually, but we don't even do like candy sales or stuff. We just kind of try to keep providing for our families in a way that suits their needs. And if the money accrues at the end of the year, that's awesome. But we haven't really done any major outreach at all at this point. I'm going to guess, I think there's about 20,000 in our donation account right now.
Of the 120?
Mhm.
Okay.
Other questions?
Time.
Thank you.
I guess I do want to keep on trying to get clarification on this. So if you were offered buildings that required repair, would you or would you not be able to spend money repairing them?
Yes, we could.
You could.
What she's saying, it's the same thing that the district is also responsible for, is that when you're using state or government provided dollars, you have a number of requirements, Department of Industrial Relations.
Relations, yeah.
Requires that you ensure that the payroll from all the projects have a proper living wage, which is a euphemism for probably triple what otherwise would be necessary, and a
Local form
number.
of Davis-Bacon,
What's that?
the local form of Davis-Bacon, is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with this
yes,
but.
the question is,
but-
yes.
Prevailing wage, you
so-
have to go for bid.
Right, prevailing wage, right.
Federal level
So,
stuff, yeah. okay.
right, so same thing the district's responsible for is it's just gonna be more costly, so dollars not going to be able to go as far, but you do have the ability to use general fund dollars potentially on those types of projects. It just would not go nearly as far as being able to use locally raised revenues for that same project because you have greater flexibility around the type of contractors you can use and the wages that you can pay.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, now I'll turn your attention back to where we left off last week, which is the document that Andy put together for us, and 2015-16 school consolidation savings. And I've left a good amount of time on the agenda for this, so I really want us to go through this and ask as many questions as you have, parse these numbers. One of the questions I asked Andy in between the meetings was about insurance savings. And you want to explain to the committee what the insurance savings would be?
Sure. So real quick, we are just going to be primarily reviewing the same document that was handed out at the last meeting. So if anyone needs a copy, I did bring a few extra copies in case anyone wants one. There you go. Is anyone else? And if anyone from the public would go, I'll make a couple copies. But again, it was handed out on the January 28th meeting. So before we get here, Glenn actually asked a great question after our last meeting, that an expense that was not included in here. So we can update this for the amount, but it's a relatively small amount. The question was around insurance and how our insurance coverages may change as well as our premiums. Because we're part of a JPA, Joint Power Authority, self-funding for all their schools in this area, they don't like to call them premiums, they call them contributions. But our contribution each year for various insurance policies, raises into the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're paying. For our property insurance, it's about $62,000, that includes auto. That's really going to be the main area of savings that you would see if we were to close a school site and we were to sell that school site. Other insurance policies like workers' compensation is based off of the hours that your employees work, and so assuming that we're not seeing a great, that's not going to really change much, so you're not going to see much of an insurance savings there. Most of our liability insurance is based around our ADA, based on the students who are in class, because the greatest liability coverage is associated to student liability. So it really goes back to property insurance being the big area where there could be some savings. If we decide not to actually sell a property, which we know that the board at this time at least has stated a position that they favor leasing, at least of this property, then we'd still be holding on to that insurance as well. And that was ultimately why it wasn't included here. But if we lease or otherwise hold on to the property, if we just allow it to stay vacant for a year or two as a decision was to be made, then we'd be holding on to the full coverage, the full property insurance. If there was a sale, though, we would see a property insurance savings. For the 3 big school sites, that works out to be about $6,000 a year each. Each school site costs about $6,000. For the smaller 2, it's based off of square footage, and those actually aren't significantly different square footage sizes. So they're about $1,500, $2,000, I believe, in that range. So that would be, if an eventual sale occurred, that would be an additional savings that we could call one of these operational type savings. That's an annual, reduction in cost. So otherwise, I think we did begin the discussion around this last meeting. We had a couple, 20 minutes or so speak on it. I wanted to, reiterate what I prefaced the conversation with last meeting, which was no staffing decisions, of course, have been made at this point. This was intended to give us an idea of likely areas where we could see some savings. This is really what we view as kind of the upper threshold of where we could have operational savings. At the 3 larger school sites, it works out to be under $250,000, $225,000 or so. At San Antonio and Summit, you'll see between $100,000 and $190,000. Obviously, on a per pupil basis, that's quite a bit larger savings. And that's just what we've talked about really going back to the first meeting, which is, a smaller school is going to have a higher percent attributed to overhead and, certain economies of scale that drive, the overall cost down at the bigger sites. So that's how we arrived at staffing levels. Again, to remind everyone from last week, this is the net savings. So this is not intended to be let's just pick out a school site. If TOPA were to close, we're not saying that there'd only be, that there's currently only $30,000 in nutritional services staffing at TOPA. There's far more. But if TOPA were to close, our nutrition services staff would have to increase at the remaining school sites, so the net savings to the district would be the $30,000. So a net between the new staffing level at the remaining school sites versus where we currently are. Same thing with, for instance, our office staff. So we talked about last meeting, we have between 1.2 and 1.4, 1.5 FTE at each of the large school sites. Remember, that translates to saying 10 hours or 12 hours a day. If we were to consolidate down to 4 schools, and it was one of the larger school sites that were closed, then that is going to require, we would recommend that that would require additional staffing in the office to help offset the increased workload from those additional students. So this is intended to be the net savings. If you go down to the operating expenses, let's just pull out a random one like electricity. The $28,000, just as we said with personnel, it's a net saving. So that takes into account the fact that when let's stick with TOPA. If TOPA were to close, they currently have about $35,000 in electricity cost. So we know that those students, when they move over, there is going to be some increased usage in electricity when those students go to a new school site. So it's not a full savings of $35,000, but we are looking at about an 80% savings rate on that on the electricity. So that's the premise behind these numbers, is a net savings as a result of a school closure.
So part of this is because at other schools where you have a block of 3 or 4 or 5 classrooms all in one building, you heat and air condition them
To an extent,
whether they're
exactly.
used or not. So if you moved kids into a currently empty classroom,
Or again, there are times that a classroom right now is only being used 1 hour a day because we're using it as one type of pull-out class. And the highest energy consumption is on bringing a room to temperature. It's not the maintenance of that temperature. And so if we're bringing a classroom each day for only 1 hour, there's not that much greater of a cost to actually maintain that room for 4 hours, let's say, or 6 hours. So that was how we arrived at the overall energy savings.
Other questions on these numbers?
So the one other thing that Glenn and I talked about that I thought could be helpful would be to provide a little bit of context to what these numbers look like. Because we talked about last meeting, these aren't that large of numbers. If our overall district budget is $25 million, then we're looking at individually not even 1% of the district budget. Across elementary schools, the budget's about $12 million, so we're looking at still not even 2% of all elementary budget savings that we could have here. But I did, and I apologize that it's a little bit crude. It's not the prettiest presentation of information, but I think it will give you all just a sense of some other options. Why don't you pass that around? So I wanted to, if you want to give it out to a few groupings, sorry. This is a summary of cost for certain other expenditures within the district. So you say, okay, we could potentially look at a savings of $225,000 at a big school or $100,000 at Summit. What could that be used for? And of course, it's not, within our purview or jurisdiction to be setting the budget in the future, but it is something that might be just helpful for us to, in general, think about. The average starting teacher cost for us is $66,000. So the operational savings.
fully accounted cost.
Fully accounted cost. That includes all of their statutory benefits, their medical, retirement, everything. So that means that we theoretically, the district could elect to use that cost savings from closing one of the large elementary schools to actually hire 3 additional teachers across the district. That'd be one option. Roughly speaking, just as a teacher is about $66,000, 0.5% on a salary schedule is close to that same amount. It's about $75,000. So if the, freed up monies could be used to help enhance our salary schedule, which Merv knows very well. We are, on the very, lowest among our peers in the county on salary schedule. So this could be some money that could go toward that.
Does that include all schools, or is that just the elementary schools?
All schools for
All
salary
schools, okay.
enhancement, yeah. And then, fortunately, we don't live in a world of furlough days anymore, but I did want to include that number because you'll see there's actually kind of a common theme that these numbers are pretty similar. And it's one that when talking with the OFT and CSEA that we're able to use fairly interchangeably, is that for about the same cost, you look at one furlough day or even the opposite, potentially adding an instructional day or staff development day. You also are looking at the same cost for a single teacher, or you could be looking at the same cost for 0.5% increase across the entire district. So those are all roughly the same in that $75,000 price point. And then as a separate thing, just to want, even though this is, again, not within our purview, our charge, if you remember back from some of the literature we got in the beginning of our meetings, the committee that came together looking at the 6-8 grade configuration option, ultimately they did believe that it was worth exploring further, and they thought it could have a lot of merit to it, but understood that the cost right now was not the cost that the district could, that they thought was the best use of those funds. That cost, according to the report, is about $150,000 each year. So the closure of 4 of the 5 elementary schools could also help free up some funding that would help enable a 6-8.
4 of the 5 elementary schools?
Closing 4 of the 5, San Antonio being now added to the 3 because San Antonio nets about 190 or so.
Closing one of those 4.
One of those 4.
Sorry,
Large.
closing one of the 4, closing any one of the 4.
You were saying closing 4 of the 5.
I'd do a whole lot.
You're taking some liberties there.
Sorry.
That's one big
Closing.
That's one.
That wouldn't be large.
That could cause a stir.
We'd have to go beyond the 6-8.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
If we were to, and Hank might be able to answer this too, if you were to take those savings and add 3 additional FTEs for teachers at the elementary level, what would that do to our class size? Does that drop our class size by 2 or 3, depending on the configuration? But that's going to drop our class.
So right,
Some quick math.
right now, 2 teachers would drop our class size by about 1.2 students. So a third would take us close to 2 students. So some of the numbers Hank provided us back in November was that we're roughly 27.7 across the district this year, 27.7 students to staff in an individual classroom at elementary level. This could drive down to 26.5, would be 2 teachers, and bring us down to about 25.7 to add 3. So.
Which speaking for my teachers even, that would be huge.
Dropping class size.
Dropping class sizes was a priority of Ojai Unified and the union.
So those numbers again, Andy, for 2 teachers, the current size is 27 point something?
7.
27.7. And the 2 teachers down to 26.5.
5.
Thank you.
So Merv, you say as a teacher that even having 26.5 versus 27.7, that's like
It's a big difference.
different? It is, okay.
Okay, so
Dropping the classes from 30 to 28 was a big difference a couple of years ago. Dropping the classes down from 28 to 26 will just be,
Okay,
you'll just be able
that's good
to work with those students just that much closer.
And you'd be down to 26, 25.9 if you had a third teacher.
Right.
I just want to.
I want to clarify a few things. One, this is based on current year enrollment. It is actually based on the numbers that were provided in November, so I want to just stick with those numbers, even though enrollment has changed a little bit since then. I think it could get confusing and start using different ratios. As well as next year, we're looking at this point a reduction in students of about 75 students at the elementary level.
And
So-
what's changed this year?
We
Since
just
November.
just as Valley Oak has ins and outs throughout the year for many reasons, the district does as well. It's very common that we have students who move into the district, students who may be moving between a private school and public school, or going over to Valley Oak. There's a lot of inflow and outflow throughout the year, or I shouldn't say a lot, but it's common.
So there's an increase of 75?
Decrease of 75.
Decrease of 75.
So if you recall in the Linka Group projection, we were projected to continue to drop for about 2 or 3 more years. And then that was supposed to be our floor. That's still what we're projecting. But I just wanted to again reiterate that the staffing ratio of 27.7 is based on those numbers that we used back in November.
Would the district be looking at layoffs again, like it has before, or not, putting people on the, whatever that
75
list is
is
called?
almost 3 classes.
What is
I'm not sure I
that?
understand the question, Mary.
Well, if you've got 75 fewer students, then you might not need, if you were to maintain the class sizes that we have, you might not need as many teachers. So would there be any discussion about telling teachers in March that they might not be rehired? And
Mary Ann, we may well need to give a very small group of first-year teachers a letter in mid-March, which of course can be rescinded in mid-May. We have differentiation within a group of 6 or 7 first-year teachers. About half have master's degree and half have bachelor's degree, and that becomes the agreed-upon cutoff. So it's probable that we'll have to deliver some of those letters, which is about 1/20th the size of what it was 6 years ago, so that's great. And then we'll just keep on working with the numbers as the spring unfolds. We have one retirement, not quite a full-time teacher, but one retirement. And there are usually other things that happen, like pregnancies and changes. So we're hoping to retain everybody, and as Murray said, if we can drop the class size without having to add teachers because the number of students has gone down, right? By retaining the same number of teachers, then you have the same result as adding the teachers that Andy's talked about.
so whether we add teachers or not is not necessarily dependent on whether we close the school or not, because we do have an enhanced budget, we have priorities that the school board is going to set. So
Absolutely.
we're not going to say that if we don't close the school, then we're not going to have a smaller class size.
Absolutely correct. This was, again, I hesitated a little bit in, throwing these numbers out, but I did want to give a little context to what those potential, 100,000 on the low end, 226 on the high end, what some of the, other options for that funding could be. But none of these things are dependent upon school closure. Each individually can occur in the current environment, absent the need to close a school.
And we also, can you speak to how much more, and I know that's probably in the governor's budget that's just come out and everything, and it's going to be revised, but can you speak to how much more money we're talking about for the district with the governor's budget?
That's a good question.
So we're looking at, this year we were about 92% of our full implementation phase of LCFF. Again, that's, remember, the funding formula that we started a couple years ago. This upcoming year will be at 96%. They're going to cut that gap in half. And then we'll have about 4 or 5 years to make up that remaining couple percent. So what it works out to dollars-wise, on LCFF funding, that puts us at about $7,500 a student right now across all grade spans. And we'd be looking at going up a couple $100 per student. So above what we were anticipating based on the January proposal, which we know there's going to be a lot of changes in the next 4 months, the district will see at least about $300,000 increase revenue for next year relative to.
Does that take into account the 75 students that we will not have?
Yes.
It does.
Yeah, because we actually were projecting, despite knowing that the revenue was going to be coming, or the LCFF was going to take one step closer toward implementation, which means we knew we were going to get more money next year. We actually were looking at a revenue budget that was holding pretty constant to this year because even though we're getting more money per student, we were losing students. So because now we're looking at, we're a little bit better number on how many students we're losing, but we also know we're getting more per student than we originally were anticipating.
It's fairly straightforward. The budget, I think you said, was about 25 million.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get another 4% of that, that's another $1 million. And if you lose 700,000 with students lost.
To clarify, actually, what we're referring to is the state funding, the primary state funding source, which the $25 million budget also is made up of federal special ed dollars, and it's made up of local donation dollars, and
so
a number of other
4% more
things.
isn't $1 million
Correct.
more.
Correct. That's correct.
I want to go back to what you said about teacher salaries, though, and whether that budget that you're talking about right now reflects like the absolute lowest common. You said something quickly about where our teachers are the lowest paid in the county. The budget you're talking about, does that include raises for the teachers, or is that still including the lowest pay possible in the county?
So we haven't, well, We haven't yet begun, negotiations, discussions with CSEA and OFT. Right now, the budget based on last year's negotiations was to put in the multi-year projection 0% salary enhancements. So the current budget budget we're working with for multi-year projections, which remember, we haven't actually created our full budget for 16-17 yet. That doesn't go to the board until June, and there's a lot that happens between now and June when we work with that. But we still have to each year project out 3 years worth of budgets, and so while we don't get too granular, we don't go down to that real fine level detail that we'll be going to in June, we still are using some numbers to create that projection a year and 2 years out. And what we did for 16-17 and 17-18 was to project 0 salary enhancements or 0 increase of salary
So
schedule.
not only no increase, but still like the lowest paid in the county.
Even if we had an increase, it's going to be very difficult for us to dig out of that lower quartile.
Can we break,
in the
that
short term.
out a little bit? Because I've seen the graph that the Star published where it talks about actually it's the beginning teachers in Ohio Unified are the lowest paid, right? It doesn't necessarily break out that that's across the board, because we have in Ohio Unified some of the teachers with the most longevity, and so they're stepping up, and so their salaries are actually not the lowest in the district. I mean, break it out so that it's...
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. There's a number of different ways to look at the salary information. So you can look at what, there's actually a website called Transparent California where you can get a lot of salary information about particular, individuals. So if you're looking at our actual staffing and what they're receiving, I honestly don't know the answer to that. But what we typically do, because it's not necessarily fair to say, well, if Ojai happens to have a whole bunch of teachers who average 20 years seniority, to compare them against a district that, like one of the districts in Oxnard, they're growing so much they're constantly hiring brand new teachers. It's not really apples to apples to say, well, a 20-year teacher in Ojai makes more than a first-year teacher in Wainimi. So what we do instead is we don't look at the average cost of a teacher in one school site or one district to another. What we look at is if a teacher in Ojai is in their 20th year of teaching with this credential level, what would they be making if they were in a different district, if they also had 20 years experience there? Does that make sense or not? Exactly.
So is,
Along the range, if you do beginning teacher, I think it's a 10-year, the maximum, and then what's called the super maximum, which are the teachers that have been teaching for 25 or 30 years. Every time you'll find us near the bottom.
So Ojai, for the absolute lowest possible starting point, is second lowest only to Moore Park Unified, who has not filled that ranking for a number of years. So for all purposes, Ohio Unified does have the lowest starting salary in the county, and as Merv said, unfortunately that trend does not change and take us out of the lowest quartile, meaning the lowest 5 districts in the county at any point along the way.
okay, because I asked that question because you got into the conversation about losing students, and let's say our class size goes down just without us, our impact. We could still give raises then. I mean, we could give the 1 point, right?
You're again absolutely correct that no decision on these individual factors that ultimately the board is the one that decides on is contingent or necessitated or is contingent upon us making a recommendation to close the school.
Yeah.
But
the district
my point is though that if you did, I mean, my point is that closing a school does still impact, I'm not speaking right, but it could have a significant impact on, say, for example, teacher salaries, regardless of declining enrollment or
Increased budgets or whatever.
And just to put it in perspective, this isn't a time when there's fewer candidates coming out of credential programs right now. We have more teachers now are aging out of the system, retiring, opting for retirement. So we are in a very competitive, education is a very competitive industry where we're trying to lure the best from the graduating classes. And when you compare us to a district, Ventura, anyone of the ones, it's going to be much tougher to lure students.
And the broader point would be if you can lure teachers, young teachers with young kids, right? Then you start to grow your actual basis for students coming into your school. So you start to kind of more deeply impact
the real estate prices in the valley. I think my wife and I may have been the last hires that we actually were able to afford to buy we bought at the very bottom of the housing market in 2008. But all the new teachers either rent or live
Yeah.
down the hill.
And staff, you said teachers and staff.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Huge
right, I
component,
mean, if
yeah.
you can impact
Absolutely.
in that way, then you have a potential to actually grow your community, which then feeds back into your schools, which
Could
then,
be a loop.
I have a question too. With all of this graphs and savings, that's only considering that you close the school and lease it, right?
No, so actually, at this point, we haven't looked at the value of the lease or a sale.
Okay.
We're only talking about what it would be the exact same if we chose to just hold on to that site for, again, some period of time to decide what the community or what the board ultimately wanted to do with it.
Okay, because my question will be, okay, if all of this considering like when you close and sell the property, would you be able to use the money to do some renovation in other schools or increase the salaries, or they have to have a lien against it and then you're gonna have to have so many other factors to be able to use that kind of money into the school district?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, we're only looking at these savings or the cost of these items, can be funded through a number of different mechanisms. But we were talking about operational savings. There is that third financial savings. We talked about Measure J and how money could be reallocated there. We've talked about the operational savings potentially, and I think you nailed really appropriately that third option, which is the proceeds from a sale or a lease. And what we received as well recently is that the extension, the number of years that I talked about previously, how they kept extending the ability to have more flexibility around the funds generated from a sale of a school site. That sunsetted, that ended this past month. So now the requirements around the use of funds if you sell a school site is that it goes very similarly, it can be used for same sorts of projects as Measure J. It goes into a separate facilities fund. And so if a school site were sold, that would be the funding, that would be the role or the purpose for that funding would not be to go into lowering class sizes. However, if you lease a property, you are able to have it, you have more flexibility, it can go into your general fund, and it can go toward some of these same sorts of
But then if we
expenditures.
lease the property, then a lot of the savings will be on the maintenance and stuff, but then you still have other expenses because you still own the property, right? I mean,
Potentially, again, depending on how the lease was structured, but that's true. Yeah.
I mean, I think this gives us a really good sense of the impact, rather than just looking at it as a broad number and thinking, wow, that's just very small, really. Because significantly, if you were to increase salaries, that's, I think, a significant positive impact.
I'm thinking about the state of our ball fields with all these gopher holes.
Oh,
It's like-
yes.
So we, and I'm not really talking about that, just as a metaphor.
You just gave Chuck a heart attack.
If we take the annual savings from closing a campus, which hole do we fill? It's like, do we fill the hole of the teachers being in the bottom quartile a little bit? Do we lower the class size? Do we get back to, we're at 180 instructional days right now. Do we ever get back to 184 instructional days? Do we move sixth graders up and pay for an enhanced program at Matilaha for 6, 7, 8? I mean, there are so many different holes in our field here that,
and we can fill some of those though with that $300,000.
and we can fill,
additional.
and we can fill some of them, and even if the state budget allows us in the next year, regardless of our decision, to lower the class size, there's still plenty of holes out in our field, whether it's lowering the class size a little bit more, or giving the teachers a pay raise, or adding instructional days back to what it used to be.
I'm really glad I don't sit on the board right now, so trying to figure out which hole to fill first.
And just to clarify, we actually are at a 184-day contract with certificate staff. It's 181 for classified.
Okay.
But the 184 is 180 instructional days, as you said, and then 4 staff development days. And I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if we ever actually were above 180 instructional days.
That's his avenue.
Yeah.
Okay. Were we lower than 180 at one
We're
point?
back.
Right, we were at, we're much below. This is the first,
Yeah.
this is the first time in 7 years, 8 years,
Yeah.
that we have gone back up to 184 a day. We were far below that for far too long.
Fill the hole.
I may have missed something.
Taking Glenn's, metaphor, this question comes from left field, but I was thinking. Okay.
One more sports metaphor.
Baseball.
We have questions from every field.
So, I was thinking about the lottery and how it like totally took off with that crazy 1.5 billion or whatever. Does that must increase somehow the allocation toward California schools because we're one of the Powerball states, correct?
So,
did you see like a
yes, but
blip?
not as much as we'd love.
Okay.
The actual revenue, so schools get about 40% of lottery dollars. So in that respect, it's a huge win. Certainly, we get a portion of that. Some people were hoping that we also would get the tax revenue generated from the fact that one of the 3 winners was from California.
Yes.
And it's actually part of the lottery is that you don't have state taxes in California on lottery revenue or lottery income. So he did have to, or he or she, I'm not sure who actually, or their gender, but they had to pay federal income tax, but they actually have state income tax waived on lottery winnings. So
So not much of a blip, but
it still was, it's still helpful that all of the revenue that lottery itself generated, we do get a chunk of that.
so the moral of the story is if you want to support your school district, buy a lottery ticket.
I remain confused about part of the discussion that was going on here. If we are reducing class size by keeping the same number of teachers and losing 75 students, how, that's, what, 700,000 in state funds?
Not that much.
500,000, okay, whatever. How do we then, as a result of losing 500,000 in state funds, also give the teachers a raise? Did I miss something in the arithmetic there?
Well, Steve, the number that Andy was using, the 300,000, that's a net increase. So remember the question was, has he factored in those 75 less students?
Yes.
The answer is yes. So we'd have a whole lot more dollars, like another 500,000, if we weren't losing students. So the net increase is in the 300 to 400 range. It would be in the 800 to 900 range.
Okay.
If we weren't losing students. So, but 300. Well, you can see how far $300,000 goes, or go, not that far.
Goes a lot farther in operations than it does in trying to get things fixed through Measure J.
That's for sure.
Peanuts for Measure J.
That's for sure. Of course.
But those are, all the Measure J estimates that you gave us last time of savings if we close one or another of the schools are all at least 10 times what the savings are in operational costs.
But that can only go back to
And it's not the same kind of money. I
No,
understand
that's
different
right.
color money.
I know, which is frustrating, but true.
But if we close one of the large schools and save 4 million, how much can we do to fix up the remaining 4 schools?
Well, I want to just ask a question about that, because that was a question that I had, just to piggyback on. Because you brought up that whole issue about the $4 million with the soft costs. So the other way to save money on the Measure J funds is what you also talked about, which is not repairing these portables that are poor or some of them that are fair. So your actual amount that you've estimated to spend is less than the 4 million. Perhaps substantially based on your
Well, keep in mind, we have about 12 million. We have about 12 million in need at each of those sites. So right now we have 12 million in known need. We have about 4 million to spend, and $1 million of that's just going to go to soft cost potentially. So you're correct that we could potentially save money by not repairing some of the structures that Josh pointed out were in need, but we still would know that we have $4 million in needs, and now we have, or $4 million in revenue available, and now instead of $12 million in needs, we have $11 million in needs, right? Does that make sense? So we still would have needs that more than double the actual revenue available.
And then also remember that was choice C or D in terms of how much was actually needed. So
Was
there's,
Plan C.
you know,
Yeah.
But
right?
we'd have
Only look at C.
But we'd have 130,000 times how many portables we didn't
Yeah.
fix that we could
Well, I think
have go to
130, I think the
130
130 number was a replacement.
That was a replacement.
With the-
Half of that
Taking
was
an old one
the
out,
concrete.
replace a new one, yeah.
That's the unit and the foundation. and the
Right, that's
foundation work.
$65,000 for
For the-
I mean, it could be part of our recommendation is simply, like at a school like Miners Oaks, could be a recommendation to remove those old portables since it looks like they have so much extra space on that campus that's not used. And if they're coming to the end of their useful life anyway.
See, if we
That doesn't
talked
save any
about,
money, but
if
at
we
least
talked
it
about
decreases
keeping
the
all the
surplus.
schools open, that there would be a reallocation of that funding toward some of these other projects in the other schools.
Wait, say that again? If we talked about keeping all the
Yeah,
schools
if we talk
open?
about keeping all the schools open, then we would have less money that we'd be spending on portables that we might not need at the campuses that had fewer students.
I don't think there's a demonstrated need to have additional portables at this point. I think.
Getting rid of them.
Yeah, taking them out.
Well, that would just be an annual maintenance cost of a portable currently, which isn't much, is it?
It
Well,
costs
we
something
wouldn't
to
be,
take
we
it
wouldn't
out.
be spending the money
Right,
that
sure.
we would be fixing.
Did we talk about cost
Yeah.
of removal though? Because that was in some.
Josh doesn't have a quote on that, but he'd said that from other places, he thought it was in the $20,000 to $30,000 a unit cost,
It
but
was
that's
almost
not.
cost prohibitive.
Well, I
Not
have
anything that's
an
completed.
article in the Star from 2008 that says that you can actually spend more than you save in closing the school.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
But I'm sorry, but I have something like, the last time, I wasn't here the previous meeting, but the meeting before, there were the 4 principals of the schools, elementary schools, and I was really impressed by the fact that most of them agree that it's not necessary to keep the smallest schools in order to be successful academically. They actually have sometimes a better pool of kids to choose and to perform better, and even is support for the teachers. In that respect, is like, do we really need to have the 5 schools? Because if we have so much trouble trying to keep the budget for all of the 5 schools, then it will be a total improvement for them to have a bigger school. And then especially if we're not gonna lose teachers, I mean, it's a good thing.
Well, see, it's a great discussion to have, and I was really glad to have the principal's perspective. And you're following up on that, and there were a lot of good points that were made, especially about having the number of classrooms per grade. But I think there's another argument that could be made, which is that smaller classrooms, smaller schools can be better for academic learning. So we did learn a lot, we did learn from the principals a lot of the advantages, and I think those were all true. But I think there's another side of that coin, which is what I've been reading and is demonstrated that smaller schools, and it's relative, right? We talked about small being relative, do have a value. And so I'm thinking, what were those schools' populations originally built for?
They're around 6, weren't they around 600
Well, those were,
students?
we know the capacity,
Oh,
but those are with
actually-
portables. But
Oh, I
I'm thinking
see
about,
what you mean.
what
Originally
they were
without the
originally,
portables.
because we were adding the portables because we had an influx of students.
Yeah.
Like I said, in the 80s, the school district was sued for having too many students on the campus.
Yeah.
So it's just another side of the coin that I think is worth a discussion, and I think it's a really valid point that the principals made. And of course, we want to listen to the professionals who are telling us that, but I think there's also a world of research about the value of relatively smaller schools.
I mean, one of the problems I'm having is with any kind of estimate of where Measure J is going to go is because the Balfour study is a very broad stroke. I mean, you have square footage in a formula. It doesn't distinguish between the actual repairs at any given school, what's actually going to be done. So it makes, until you grind down to that detail, it's very difficult to judge what that impact's going to be on any of the campuses. So you have that money, but on the other hand, you really don't know how you're going to allocate it, because to get down to that level of detail, to project detail and budgets and bids and things like this, you got a lot of work to do.
Chris, I think that's a great point, and just, if I take 2 minutes, we're at the point now where we're grinding, okay, and we've identified through a committee comprised of administration, Chuck, teacher, representative, board, and COC representatives and Balfour Beatty to start putting dollar figures on specific projects at Matilla High and Nordoff. So we're not doing anything with what you're working on. That's sort of point number one. Point number two, you couldn't be more correct, that if you take a look at that study, what it did was to identify genres of work, put unit costs on it, multiply it out, and then see how the numbers fell, 10 plus million at Nordoff, 1 million at Summit, and everything in between. So what it gives you is a relative cost among the schools.
Right.
So, and you've used that concept a lot, right? Glenn keeps referring 4-4-4, 2-1, that kind of thing. So it really helped you in terms of that broad stroke. But we're nowhere near being able to know if you were to close that particular school, took those dollars and put it in the other schools, exactly what projects you could do with those other schools with the money that you then save. But I guarantee you could do more.
And
I'll accept that.
And not get, probably, get back to Melanie, probably not get to choice B. You'd be sort of a C+.
But if we look at closing one of the large elementary schools, then I think from the data that we've seen, it's going to be unlikely that we could take out any portables at the other two. In fact, we would have to spend the full amount to fix them up.
Well, I think Josh didn't say that, certainly Measure J funds would still be in play there, whether it's portables or permanent classrooms and all the others. But he did say that at every school, wasn't it Miners Oaks even, like Miners Oaks barely squeaked in with adequate or better. Topa barely squeaked in. Yeah.
Right.
Miramoni was in the best condition.
So yeah, those would still be subject to spending Measure J funds on if we closed one of the three big schools. The other schools, all the buildings would be subject to Measure J funds. Well, the only thing we know is that we would have more money available to us.
I think the prevailing number goes back to what Mary Ann was saying, what were the schools built for? So then Lincoln comes in and tells us, I'm just rounding off, that the three large schools each have about 25 what they call regular classrooms. So if every one was filled, and we averaged 25, that's 625 kids in that school. Well, you're not going to use all 25. So the answer to Mary Ann's question is, capacity is a flexible kind of thing. So remember, I took out, just because I took it out, when I met with the Lincoln people, I took out 5 classrooms in their study. And so if you take a look at each of the large schools has 5 classrooms unused. So now you're down to 20, which means if you did that, you'd have 500 to 550 or so, depends on how you count classrooms, with 5 classrooms not used. Now you may not need 5, so maybe you only need 3. So maybe you could move the capacity up to 600 or so in the 2 large schools. So if you just keep using that sort of accordion kind of thing, 25 to 27 classrooms, to 25 to 27 per classroom, you get a maximum. It doesn't perfectly fit that way, right? But you get a maximum in those high 5s to low 6s, easily 500 to 525. That sounding about right, Andy? Okay. And then San Antonio, we know if you don't add a classroom, which you could do, but under present conditions, it would be 7 times 25 or 175. Summit 4 times 25 or 100. That goes back to the study that we did. So that's sort of how the space utilization works, absent the issue of the condition of the portables.
And if the recommendation were to close a campus that was not one of the 3 big schools, then it's even easier in terms of those numbers, because now you have 3 campuses that can hold 15 to 1600.
You can not use a bunch of portables.
That 25 classrooms per large campus.
It's about 26, yeah.
25, 26. That was counting portables?
Yeah, everything.
Okay. So to the extent that there are portables at any one of the big campuses that need repair, then that comes out of, the operational savings, I guess.
Well,
Measure J.
It is Measure J. Okay, great.
Yeah, Josh gave us a document on January 21st that some of the campuses, Miramonte has 13 portables. Of 27 classrooms, 13 are portables. So some of them are quite high. Miners Oaks, 26 classrooms, of which 5 are portables.
I think that number, I think it's higher than that.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, excuse me. 5, 6, 7, I read the wrong column. They have 11 portables, yeah. 14 at Miramonte.
And then the only one who has the worst condition is Miners Oaks, which are 4.
Yeah. But that still leaves them with 26 plus, well, it still leaves them with 22 classrooms, so just barely enough according to the, if we did 22 times 25.
Right.
Yeah. And if the class sizes, as I understand, the class sizes right now are a little bit higher than that, and if class sizes stayed a little bit higher than that, that's even
Like I
less
said,
pressure.
it's according.
Okay. So we've sort of gotten into this discussion about Measure J funds and the potential cost savings of closing a campus. And for my purposes, I just wrote it into my chart here because I just kind of wanted to see that. With the soft costs, about $4 million at one of the large schools, $1.9 million at San Antonio, $1 million at Summit. Any questions about any of the rest of that at this point? Have we exhausted the subject? You guys feel like?
I think it's fair to conclude that operationally, anything that we do isn't going to save a whole lot of money.
Percentage of the
But we
budget.
could save a lot of Measure J money with some of our decisions.
Yeah.
Not sure about that. I mean, here's a, so if you were to take the board's recommendation of consolidating the 6, 7, 8 at the middle school, and then how many students, then we're talking about 1,000 students or so, roughly 1,000 to 1,100 K through 5 students, if you move the 6th grade up, right? You can almost do it with Topa and Miramonte, just having those two. You wouldn't have, just think about that, the cost savings
Just
for
two
that.
schools.
Just an east side school and a west side school. You would, if you closed down Miners Oaks, Topa and Summit, you'd have enough capacity with those 2 big schools. Then all of a sudden that number goes
You mean
$500,000 a year in facility savings. $500,000 a year, in 2 years, we're gonna stop declining enrollment. That cost savings will start going and to turn that train around, so.
It's over 400.
I mean, it's not insubstantial. I'm not saying that's a realistic idea, but there are a lot
That's over
of.
400,000 in operational costs if we took one big one and the 2 small ones.
It's over 500,000, right?
226, 190, and
26,
106.
426, 5.
And again, but I just devil's advocate, when we talk about how different schools are right for different kids, I think that was the point that one of the principals made very well. I think it's nice to have the choices in Ojai. And if we didn't have those choices, we might have fewer students in the school
Yeah, I think it's
district.
important to have the choices in Ojai. I mean, I've had discussions with people about why people move to places like Ojai or Upper Ojai. And the whole reason you move to places like Ojai or Upper Ojai is because you're kind of looking for a very significant type of school environment, culture environment, impact on your kids. So I think we have to be careful completely eliminating options because, again, people choose to live here specifically for certain reasons. And I think going to a small school, and by that I mean weirdly small, not sort of small. I mean, because that's why you live here. Like, that's why you go here. You kind of go, yeah, I live in Ojai, it has 8,000 people. My kids go to a school that has 150 kids, or, I mean, I get 600 is small, but
It's all relative.
it's all relative.
But
yeah.
it's very hard to quantify because, or even project, because if you have a $500,000 savings that can go to schools, you have some of the benefits of economy of scale of larger schools. So now you have more money pouring into lesser units that are better spread between student per capita cost. Then you might be having to be able to offer things that attract students. So it's very difficult to say you're going to lose or you're not going to lose.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating one side or the other. I'm just saying that I can see that you could you could have programs that could attract students and offset any loss from the loss of a small school culture.
And I wasn't
I think the
advocating for
ideal-
the closing 3 schools. I was just,
Yeah, you're just saying that.
saying that's
Just
a
an
possibility.
Right, and I think just if we want to talk hypothetically, it would be nice, I think, to remain with many different choices in the district so that you have schools that work together possibly and offer, advanced programs at school A and, extra music at school B. And then you have, okay, over here, we have our small school that appeals to this whole other group of students. And then I think it would be nice to be able to sort of figure out a way to meet every need, if that makes sense.
To Melanie's point, Glenn and I had a conversation, like I'm sure many of you did throughout the week. I've been taking notes this entire time on the unique cultures and offerings of each school, each of the 5 schools, and it's amazing, how we can all fit under the same banner of Ojai Unified and still provide these amazing gifts to these kids. And so just going through them real quickly, Summit is, of course, DOC for Santa Paula. First thing, that's correct, right? It's DOC?
Sure.
For Santa Paula. It's also even very much a cultural center. I mean, God bless them, they have that little burger joint, and they've got the school up there, and that's it.
And a
4-H
fire
meetings.
station.
Yeah, the firehouse, which is like.
Market there, what are you talking about?
Oh, they have I must have missed that market blowing through there.
Major feature of the town.
Is it like
Bigger than the rest of the town, so it's got to have some significance.
Is it a kiosk? I missed it somehow.
No, it's a regular store.
So they, I love that place. It's so beautiful, and but it really is. I mean, 4-H meetings are held there. I mean, it's a cultural center. The carnival is like the whole community shows up. They don't even have kids in the school, and they go to the fall carnival. It's so cute. And then we have San Antonio, which is Ojai Unified's closest, private school setting. I mean, with that amphitheater and, with 3 acres of land, and it's historical. It was the first building was built in 1887. There's so much. It's really a draw for East End families that maybe, hey, this is close enough to a private school and it's free, so hey. Then there's, Miramani, which is DOC for Ventura County, right? I mean, it's closest to Oakview, and, even some kids, I think Catherine was saying some kids come in from Ventura.
Few.
2? Oh, okay.
A few.
Okay. Can't believe you know that, but okay. And then we have, Miners Oaks, which I checked this with Suzanne Lugatoff. They are the distribution center for all the food that gets distributed to all the school sites. And they even cook the food for, I believe it's San Antonio and Summit, and then deliver it there. So the kitchens at Miners Oaks and the distribution portion of Miners Oaks is also very important. And Topa Topa has, and this to me is like, wow, Topa Topa has the communications tower, which I just found out from Josh, is on one of our red portables, which I won't even go into that. But I mean, so the line of sight, I can't even pretend to know anything about this, but is it at the highest elevation other than Summit? So that provides the communication. So they all have their own, offerings to the school district, whether they're pragmatic, practical, or whether they're cultural or whatever. So I think when we look at closing any of these sites, we have to look at the uniqueness of each, and as Melanie said, the offerings to the community as well as to the families. And I love this cost analysis stuff, but I constantly go back to, the long-term cost, real cost of closing any of these schools. Thank you for listening.
It's important.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good time just to point out, what we were talking earlier about enrollment projections and bottoming out next year at 1250 or so. And on the Dolinka study, it's 1258 to, 2016-17, and then it shows growth in 17-18 back up, and sort of peaks in 2023, which sounds so far away, but probably isn't. 1441 in the elementary school, so we should keep that number in mind too, that we want to make sure we're maintaining capacity, no matter what we decide, for at least that and maybe more.
Well, and I was struck by those numbers initially that we had, because there is not a precipitous drop. Like, there's not a gun in our head saying we have to close the school because we're gonna have nobody in our campuses. This is pretty level all the way out in that projection.
But I wonder if it's an indicator if we could go back 10 years earlier and be sitting here and then look 10 years to where we're sitting now. Should we have made the decision 10 years ago, or should we continue pushing it off?
It's a hard decision.
The reason this committee was formed is because there is at least a potential fiscal crisis here, maintaining all these elementary school facilities.
Facility fiscal crisis.
Yes,
Well,
right.
wait. Define crisis, because we were at a crisis in 2008. I think we're far out of the crisis in 2016. So define crisis, and then really let's talk about why we did create this committee. I'm going to totally be the devil's advocate. We don't know each other very well, and I just think we need to have a vigorous discussion, so it's never going to be personal. I just really want to just have these ideas just kind of duke out here, just
I think the
ideas.
most significant, the information that most significantly impacted me was that we have two large facilities very close together that are half full. That to me was the most significant fiscal impact. How is our district operating responsibly with that information is the most impactful to me.
Okay, so half full, again, let's
Half full,
define our
two
terms.
schools.
Let's define our terms though. What is half full? Is it half full with portables?
Well, I
that were
think-
put in place to deal with expanded populations, or
I thought
what is half full?
I thought the way you explained it with the 5 extra classrooms were still sort of
So
at
I
half
think-
capacity.
I actually, if I can, I have a few things. One, Steve, I want to respond to the statement that this committee was formed because we'll have a fiscal crisis without making a decision to close the school. That's just not the case. I can say that it's not what the board was thinking, that's not what Hank has thought, and certainly not me. We have the ability to continue with all 5 schools without having that be what results in us being in a fiscal crisis. At the same time, we've talked about some of the increased revenue that we're expecting for next year. We're deficit spending this year, and even next year, we're still projecting deficit spending despite the increase in revenue. So right now, if we don't see a significant spike in new revenue above and beyond what we saw just a month ago with the January proposal, we're looking at needing to make cuts in the magnitude of about $500,000 in the 17-18 budget. That's not because I don't think that's because we have the 5 school sites, and that if only we close one of those 5, that would solve the fiscal issues. But we are deficit spending, and we're projecting that into the future, and we're hoping that the revenue will continue to come, and we'll also have to make some tough choices in the next couple of years. But I don't think the committee was formed for that purpose, but certainly we want to look at and see if we can help free up some dollars, and we can also look at what's best for students. I think what Mary Ann said a few times is the idea that we're referring to full or half full, or I'm sorry, we're referring to half full when we take into account all of the portables. If we removed all the portables, then all of a sudden we're actually pretty close to full currently. But I think the assumption, Marion, that you keep making is that there was never an intention to have portables, and that portables are perhaps a bad thing, and that the full campus is its buildings.
No, I think Josh talked me out of that from that
Okay,
meeting
because, yeah,
that
the
we had.
buildings
I think
are
that's
80 years old,
I think that's an
and
important thing to
the-
have. I mean, Summit only has.
Right, yeah, San Antonio only has really 2
Yeah.
classrooms.
So Josh, quickly.
So I think you keep trying, actually help me instead of me making an assumption, you keep trying to clarify what we're referring to as half full,
Well, I mean, I
if
know
we should keep the
portables. So
portables on,
it's a
that sort
broad
of thing.
statement, but I'm just wondering how many of those portables were put in because we had so many extra students at a time when we had a high enrollment. So yeah, I understand that there are some fabulous portables that are there and serve wonderful purposes. But I don't know if it's all or nothing with the portables.
Sure, that's true.
So I really question the ideal number that they were talking about back in whenever those schools were built. But then why do we even have to think about that? We really have to think about what an ideal number is, and that's something that we have to thrash out. So I love the fact that we had those principals give that all of those advantages. But I really would like to look at some of the research, which I'm sure is out there, that's been done on ideal sizes, and then what is an ideal size fit for Ojai? Just another,
Because you kind of speculated on that, right? It's like around the 600, 700 range, so.
When Steve asked me the question, that came up both before the principals came and when the principals came. I think there was a lot of symmetry, right? That basically, in my opinion, and there's plenty of research out there. Number one, there is no research on an ideal size, okay? But there's quite a bit of research on, in general, what might be too small, except if you have a special set of circumstances, for example, Summit or San Antonio. San Antonio would be probably below the threshold size-wise of a highly effective organization for an elementary school, right? Because right now, we have 7 grades and 6 teachers. Last year, we had 7 grades and 5 teachers. The year before that, we had 7 grades and 4 teachers. The year before that, we had 6, and so, so it varies so much by the people who decide they want to go there. So I don't think you could make the argument, absent the unique characteristics of San Antonio or Summit, that having fewer teachers than you have grades is an ideal organization. I don't think you can. In fact, I don't think you could argue that having less than 2 teachers per grade is an ideal organization, right? So I would say 14 teachers in our K through 6 organization would be, in my mind, the basement number, lowest level. So then you go from 14 to 21, 28, that kind of thing, and it's back down the accordion thing again. But I still feel, and I felt before the principals came, I think you heard, that, that and the one, remember, Dawn and Catherine had experience at Miners Oaks and Miramonte when it was 500 to 600 plus. Right? Cheryl had experience as a 4-year principal of an elementary school, K through 6, that had 625 students. So there was a lot of conversation about personal experience. And what I heard, and I think what you heard, is that, and I'm not saying that there isn't a place in Ojai for a small school. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying from an organization, from staff interaction, from sharing resources, from identifying students, from the earlier grade to go to the next grade, in a teacher or not a teacher, right, when you have choices, I still think that 3 to 4 sections per grade is about right, if you're just starting from scratch. And one of the things I'm sure you'll talk about is, all right, well, if we close this school or this school and that school, if you keep K6, this is what it looks like, Merce Point. If you have K5, you have 175, 180 students taken out. We can take a look at Matella. The only thing I heard, and I just want to correct what you said, the board didn't make a recommendation to have.
No, the committee did.
Committee.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, that's all right. I just wanted, since we're on TV, I just wanted to be sure. It never actually got to the board, okay? Because when I chaired the committee, and I was the one that recommended it not go forward as a recommendation because we couldn't pay for it. Right? So everything else you said, I think, was spot on. So anyway, that's what I think. And it's a tough decision. I think Marianne's right to keep moving other criteria. I think Linda knows all that because she's working on websites for us. Right? So she's talking with all the principals. She knows a lot of things that are going on in these schools. I thought her monologue was terrific.
Yeah.
That is what it's about.
Yeah, right. Because there might be an ideal school scenario, but you also have to take into consideration how it serves the community as well. So
Absolutely.
There's going to be an ideal school scenario that serves a given community as well.
And the configuration is what's critical, right? So you have to put all of them together to get the right number of seats in the right geography with the right combination of types of schools.
Yeah.
so then we're going back to another issue that we might have rehashed, or we might have hashed out a little bit, which is, I think there might be an opportunity to grow, which you'd agreed with, but you said, we're not going to grow into enough students to make a real difference. But if we look at our schools not as drags on our budget, but as assets and as opportunities to do the magnets or to do the expanded, I don't know what it would be, independent study, or we do more of the juggling with Chaparral, or we do something with this building. I mean, I think that there are some positive numbers out there that could be found from maintaining a school. I'm throwing these ideas out. I'm not backing any of these ideas with arguments. I'm just throwing these out as things for us to think about. And I think at some point before our meeting's over, I'd like to discuss like how we're going to come to formulate a decision, like what's the best way, because I think our process is essential in this, and then how we're going to make that recommendation to the board. It might be a little bit too early for that, but I'm just throwing out these ideas that I kind of like for us to hash out a little bit, and I'm just got things in my head. I would like to hear what some of your thoughts are about.
Well, I would say, being like Steve mentioned, you can't say, well, we could do this, so we need to do this, because those programs are very difficult to build and to put together and fund and everything else. On the other hand, it's pretty clear, I think, from everybody's feelings here, is that all school districts have to start really looking at how do they attract students, how we do this, with different kinds of instruction, as Laura pointed out, whether it be individualized or magnet or whatever. So I think another criteria to throw in there on any idea of closing and selling something or leasing it where the tenant improvements change the character of that building, think about, are we foreclosing any options? Even though we don't know what those options may be, but are we foreclosing the possibility of developing new programs, because now we are crunched for space and we no longer are able to acquire land to do that because it's way beyond everybody's cost to do that. So I just throw it out there in line with what Marianne is saying, is that we do have this sort of this vague subjective, are we going to foreclose options if we dispose of property down the road, when we may regret doing that, even though we can't see exactly what that
Keeping
use
in
may
mind
be.
that leasing property, as Hank said, is relatively easy. Selling property is not within the purview of the school district. That takes rezoning, and you've got to go to the city council or the county supervisors or somebody to get that
I
done.
think, Steve, leasing is going to be a challenge too. but
Yeah.
Could be.
Less so, I agree.
Less so.
Less so.
And Glenn, you have a point about closing a property without having a plan for it.
Right.
So I think
I
that's
wouldn't
what
be,
I'm trying to talk
I
about.
wouldn't be in favor of voting to close a school unless we knew specifically what was going to happen to that campus. Specifically meaning sale or lease, unless we had a very clear plan. The last thing I'd want to see is a campus with a chain link fence around it 5 years from now, still unused.
With the plywood in the windows, that's a good look.
Yeah, exactly. The welding shop,
But then the question is, we don't have any information as what is the leasing potential. I mean, obviously, no one took the school district up on facilities here. One was interested.
Well, how much?
So we have no idea what that actual market potential is to lease any of these things.
So I did request for Eric Wild and his family's real estate firm to actually assist us with providing those numbers. He's generously actually offered to donate his time in this endeavor, so the district did not incur cost for it, and he is going to have it ready for our next meeting for February
Very helpful.
25th. Thank you.
You're talking
So-
about it's an assessment of some type. What will he be providing?
I hate to commit and do anything on TV, but the goal is looking at what the best uses for the property would be. So looking at, Amir Monte has very different potential suitors for a property like that than San Antonio or Summit would have. And so looking at, what would be the likely best use of that property, and then therefore the impacts potentially on zoning, and then giving some way of a general lease and sale value. I said the most important thing to me was that we'd have a way to compare properties. So it helped me if we are thinking about one of the big three schools, if we knew that one of the three was worth a lot, higher value. Miramonte's worth more because it's on a 33, or if Myers Oaks is worth more because it's in a residential area and it might have other potential uses there, and of course Topa's in a residential area. So getting a way for us to compare the value across the school site. So that's what he's really working on with his team right now. He's going to try to get it to us by the 20th, so we'll have a few days to review before the meeting on the 25th.
So is that the segue into how
Good.
surplus property is handled?
Yeah, I think so.
Because, what I was reading, there are requirements for to be parks or to be low-income housing or all sorts of,
It goes to
Well, those people have
governmental
the right
public
of
use
right of
first.
first refusal.
So
Right.
we received, I sent out via email a couple of documents, one of which I printed, the shorter one, which is the summary, which basically just talks about what the district must do in order to put a property up for sale or for lease. Have you all seen this?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have any questions about it, or do you understand what they're saying here?
Well, I'm wondering how that's going to impact Eric's assessment of possibilities.
It's more quantifiable is what Eric is doing, right? He's providing us with
Yeah,
numbers.
You're saying how would the reality that government property is treated differently than, or surplus property is treated differently than another, I wouldn't be qualified to speak to that.
Well, you're not gonna find that out until you actually do it.
Right,
Because,
right, because there's-
because you have these people, these parties you have to first offer to, and you have no idea what that response is gonna be, and so you really are into looking at something that Eric will put together that is going to be, if nobody else steps up in this progression of priorities, then this is what the potential is.
Right, right.
Well, and then I wonder how much potential there is when we have this building where it's been an ongoing discussion with nothing happening. Then you have.
Well, is that true? Are you in ongoing discussions with anybody?
But I mean, we've been talked about it for years.
Yeah, it's been on.
Say sporadic.
Yeah, I think the reality is that the board a March ago made, as Andy said, we're not going to sell this, we might lease it under the right conditions. Okay, we haven't aggressively looked at it, although we're going to, because the market is such now that I think it's worth looking into.
So that
Is
would.
there a,
Go ahead.
is there a
So it's on the agenda.
potential, is there a potential that if we closed a property like, let's say for example, Miners Oaks, that this could be moved there and then we could lease this
Sure,
property?
absolutely.
Okay.
We wouldn't
Because
need,
this
we
property-
wouldn't need all the miners oaks, but
Right,
there'd be
but
plenty of space.
Because this property seems the most logically easy to. Commercial, yes, because it's right
Yeah,
downtown.
That's the plus side. The difficulty is that it's right in the middle of the city, and people have, many people have many different opinions about
Okay. What would
is-
be here.
what should be here, including this. They don't want anything but this.
Okay.
The person or persons that you've talked to about this facility, are they interested in the facility? Are they interested in the land and doing something other than this facility on the land?
Definitely not this facility. It would be.
So it would be lease the land and they would take this down and put
Take
something
down-
else up?
Take down part of it, leave part of it, put up certain types of, uses. It could be a combined use of some type of living apartment kind of thing with small shops, with a variety of things. The issue is how much of the 8 acres would be leased, and how do you keep the structures here that people feel are so important for the city, and still potentially do some things up in the corner that are less in view.
Is it feasible to relocate the transportation center here to another one of the
That's a
campuses?
challenge, yeah, if we weren't, right, we could.
It's an opportunity to upgrade it,
You
wouldn't it?
could, that's for sure. You could.
I don't want to speak on the grade of it, but.
If you closed an elementary school, we could move something as big as that there. The problem is, with all of our facilities, if we looked at closing that upper corner, for example, because someone wanted to lease it, we have to figure out what to do with those things, right? And the city has a yard, but that's another issue, so anyhow, the issue of looking hard at potentially leasing part of this property is on the agenda. I just want to get this done first. I think the board can only sort of deal with that many big issues at one time. This
Yeah.
needs to come first, that comes second.
I just think it's going to be very difficult to speculate on how a closed property is
Yeah.
going to be used. I think
Yeah, I
that's
don't-
going to be really difficult.
I don't know how we could make a decision on that, because it's completely unknown what might happen to the property if it's closed.
Well, certainly, I don't want to oversimplify it, but districts sell property. I mean, there are allowances for that, right? I mean,
No,
it
SEMA
happens.
just sold 2 in the past, well, it sold 2 school sites and their district office in the Simi Valley
Okay.
in the past year, and I think the 2 school sites netted close to $10 million. together, combined.
Because they're
Okay,
building new, correct?
So we shouldn't necessarily.
They had one school site that they had actually kept closed for about 20 years before they decided to do anything with it, and then they decided to sell it. Their district office they sold because they did want more space. They currently have to use City Hall for their board meetings. They want to be able to have space where they actually have their own boardroom. And the other school site was one I also believe had been rented out for a little while, but had not been used by them, and they were able to sell.
So even though those funds are really allocated, specifically allocated, we shouldn't necessarily take that off the table, that we might sell a property.
I wouldn't take it off, but I would say it's a distant second right now to leasing. I mean, I found no instinct or sort of belief on the part of these 5 board members that selling is something they wanted to do.
For this property here.
For this place, and I would.
But I'm saying like.
Even, I would say, since we haven't had a discussion, I'm just speculating.
Yeah.
Hearing the conversation, I think they would be disinclined to sell, could look at something to lease, maybe be more amenable to leasing a site that isn't so central, right, to the city of Ojai compared to this one,
Yeah.
maybe. But I wouldn't assume that selling would be a likely result.
Well, and we do have one option, we do have Valley Oak Charter.
Well, yeah,
interested
right.
in-
I mean, yes,
Yeah,
we do.
yeah. And they would be, I would think, more likely to be interested in leasing one of the 2 smaller campuses. I don't know what they would do with the Miners Oaks facility, for
Well, that's
example.
a portion.
I think it'd be very difficult to lease the Miners
We're
Oaks
talking about a
facility.
portion of a school, so it could even be.
Possibly.
Could
a
join
portion
with it.
Of a school
Okay.
that's not being closed,
District
so,
office.
so like a Miramonte, a portion of Miramonte could also be leased, or Miners Oaks, or Topa or any of them, since they're not capacity.
If I could just raise a hypothetical, since we're talking about a Valley Oak, 75 students. I'm thinking about San Antonio School. Now, I find these rules very complicated to understand. So if we voted to close San Antonio School, for example, then we're not obligated to offer a lease to Valley Oak, but if we entered into a lease with Valley Oak, do we get market value for the lease?
Oh, that's what Andy was talking about the last time.
So the rules actually that we discussed before wouldn't apply because we both are entering into it freely and be an open negotiation. When you are required to offer it, for instance, if they were a classroom-based program that had more than 80 ADA that were in district, then we had to make the offer, then that's where the calculation does get incredibly complex. And ultimately, they look at a number of factors going back to the actual purchase date of the property or the value at the time of the acquisition, the improvements made upon, and depending on where those improvements, the funding for those improvements came from, it can alter the calculation. Then they do a CPI indexing, giving it a,
You don't have to worry about it.
Right.
None of that will ever happen.
My question
And then
is,
That's only if you're gonna sell it though, Andy.
so to
It
clarify,
makes it easier.
to clarify, is there a way for us, like, for example, just under that hypothetical I just mentioned, could we go straight to, could the board decide to go straight to a decision like that? Or do we have to go through some complicated offering to a public agency?
For Valley Oak, you're talking for Valley Oak.
For Valley Oak specifically?
How do you get to Valley Oak?
Yeah, how do you get to Valley Oak?
You would have to offer it to the entities that have a priority to it. So because Valley Oak does not have a legal right to it, we would have to offer it to some of those other entities that we've talked about, the city potentially or others. If they have first in line, second in line, third in line rights to a property, they would have it before we could enter into a negotiation with someone that didn't have those same level of rights.
And I think at that level of value, if I'm not mistaken, this is oversimplifying it, but at that priority level of sale, you're looking at the calculations being mostly a floor, and you can negotiate above that. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that is.
Well, and then Hank just said, the bottom line is you don't have to look at it, but actually you might have to look at it because I think that there would be other schools that would want a charter and that would ask the district for that space.
If you had 80, a minimum of 80 in-district classroom kids, ADA.
But since the cap is 75, and that's not all in district.
Well, again, that's not Valley Oak. They're saying a hypothetical
A new
alternative charter.
charter school.
Because Valley Oak, even if they were above it's not in classrooms. So that's what Laura was mentioning earlier, is that it actually it fails those requirements, those Prop 39 requirements on a number of factors. They actually don't have 80 students at all, so much less, which remember ADA is different than enrollment. It's actually about 86 enrollment that they required. So they don't have the 86. They certainly don't have the 86 that have to be in district, and they also aren't a classroom-based program. So if
We're
they're,
looking at 800.
right, so if there was a,
You need 7 rooms.
We really need 7 numbers, yeah.
So Summit wouldn't do in any case, even if it were closer, but San Antonio might. You have 7 rooms there?
Yes.
Yeah.
7 rooms plus an office and a,
Library.
multi-purpose room.
Well, I don't think you should discount that one of the smaller schools or another school that was closed would not want a charter. That would be an in-classroom school district. I mean, I've certainly had those conversations with San Antonio parents, but like I said, it was several years ago. But I think I don't think that you can discount that automatically. So that's another.
Of course you can, yeah, right, it's a good point. It's an unknown. Yeah.
So we still have a big basket and it's full of unknowns.
That's the thing, yeah.
And a lot of gopher holes.
So many variables.
The knowns that we have here on consolidation savings are too small to worry about in a lot of senses.
It's the Measure J money, that's the big question mark.
And I'll say, I'm not sure, I was convinced a bit more, I made a comment at the last meeting, but I'm convinced a bit more if we can find money to give the teachers 1.5%, rather all staff 1.5% across the board, or do some of these other things that Andy talked about. I don't think that's something we should ignore.
Yeah, I don't think that's in.
Because, every little bit, and part of, Melanie, you said something several meetings ago that stuck with me, which is that, our responsibility to make a recommendation that helps the district run more efficiently. And I know it's not all about the numbers, but the numbers do figure into it as well. And so I think that's where it's.
Well, because ultimately, running efficiently is going to be what's best for the students.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
Sure.
I mean, I realize it's not completely a numbers game, obviously, it's not. But when you run efficiently and you operate within your budget, then you are doing what's best for your students, and you're providing them and their teachers with the best possible opportunities. So I think it is very
But running
important
most
to do.
responsibly might not be closing it down, because there could be unintended consequences. And I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, no, I was just to say that, what Glenn is saying, just to add to that, it's important to consider things like the 1.5% for teachers, because that is a big deal. It's not necessarily the biggest deal in terms of money, but in terms of staff morale and stuff like this, it's a big deal.
It certainly helps with the teachers that are already here.
And no one's going to argue that, but that 1.5, any improvement in pay is big. But got to realize, in the context, a lot of these districts are getting 4 or 5% a year, 6-7% down in Oxnard. If you're talking in Santa Barbara, 7, 8, 9, the unions are saying we are going to impasse at 9%, and that's what we're getting we were really grateful to get a 2.5% last year with our return of our full furlough days. But as these districts keep outpacing, how
We can't be competitive.
do you know what do you guys know what the average teacher tenure in the district is right now? My feeling it's got to be 17 plus years.
It's somewhere in the mid-teens,
So I mean,
So we have to replace-
So you're talking 3 or 4 years. Most of our
Yeah.
employees are going to have a 20-year stake in the district, and I know several teachers who are, counting down the days.
Yeah.
Counting down the years. Say, I got a couple more, and I'm out of here.
Yeah,
And
I know.
then if we keep that path going for 2 or 3 more years, how do we go to UCSB and Cal State Channel Islands and Cal State Northridge and make a recruitment pitch? Hey, come to us.
Yeah.
You can't afford to live in the valley.
Yeah.
But hey, why don't you drive up the hill? And a lot of the teachers. There are a lot of teachers who want to work in this valley, and they
Well,
do.
there's-
But at a certain point, there's going to be a breaking point to where you're not
There
going to
will
get
be,
the
right.
the
And then
best
maybe
candidates to
something
teach.
really bold has to be done. I'm just throwing this out, okay? But how about using one of these sites to build low-income housing for teachers?
Yeah.
Hey,
Hey, I'm all for.
Well, do that.
We had a large
Build a
discussion
community that
about
the
that at the
houses
planning
should-
commission meeting and
They
the
had to do
city
that in
council.
Simi Valley.
Because here's the impact. The point is,
Like somebody gonna afford to
do
live
you remember
here.
Dr. Ogg, right?
Dr. Ogg.
Dr.
I remember
Ogg.
Kendall Neely.
Okay,
I
he was
remember-
Klaus's geometry teacher freshman year, left December, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Klaus, he was like amazing. He was this amazing teacher, affected Klaus so deeply. Klaus was really bummed when he left. He's a perfect example of a young teacher with young kids, working in a district, energizing the kids, potentially attracting students, and we can't pay him competitively.
Except,
So
he wasn't actually indicative of anything other than himself. I mean,
He's a doctorate.
He had a doctorate.
Right, he's
And he was an
sort of
engineer- and he was
special.
an engineer
Yes.
who went back to making twice to three
But-
times as much as the highest paying.
But the thing, I guess the overall point I wanted to make though is that good teachers.
I hear your passion, but-
Yes. Good teachers are going to have the draw. They're going to draw the kids, they're going to
I agree with
impact.
everything Merv said.
And
I agree
so
with everything.
you're
The problem-
definitely.
The problem is, the reality is, that, first of all, I just want to underscore, as we said it last time, and Steve made his beautiful statement about how terrible it would be to lose any of those wonderful principal
Yeah,
times.
absolutely.
People times, staffing. So remember, when you're talking about 225 by closing elementary school, that is the upper limit with a full cut, right, of that position. Just want to be sure we're remembering that, that's number one. Number two, and this is what has made me ill for 7 years, including when we gave, it was 2.5 plus 1, so the reality was 3.5% one time in 7 years. You know, that was a 3.5% when the county was at about 5, and we're already 19th out of 20, so therefore we went 19th and a half out of 20, because everything keeps moving up. And this coming year, when everybody's 5, 6, 7, because the money's even better, we're talking about 0, right?
Yeah.
So going from 0 to 1, even if you spend all that money,
Yeah.
and it was 1.5%, we're still 4+% behind the average for 16, 17.
Deeper in that bottom
So this is not,
quartile.
it's not a magic bullet even close.
Well-
okay? It's a help, but it doesn't answer the question of how we can recruit in a competitive salary environment. We can't.
Well, I was going to say, it makes the point though, right, that status quo is really not okay. I
No.
mean, right? I mean, that's the
Or
point.
status quo plus 1.5.
Right, so yes, so, you know, we're at status quo, it's not working.
Or status quo is 0, not,
Yeah.
okay, 0.
And the whole idea that we want to make our schools more competitive and better
And
and.
lure more
Yes.
kids in. And we go onto the campus, it's the kids, it's the teachers, it's the principals, it's the families, right? And it's not so much the buildings or the location of those buildings.
It's
You
the
can, if you travel an extra, it's a community. If you travel an extra mile and a half, a lot of people travel 4 miles from Miners Oaks to San Antonio because it's got that, you know, so people, I mean, if you can put that magic number of students and families and teachers together, you can make magic happen. But it's you know, it's a very unique recipe. And I think we were fortunate to have a lot of unique recipes in this
Yeah.
family.
So Glenn, you were talking about, in one of your most recent emails, about sort of an exit strategy. I think we can talk about this. No, you know, like, oh gosh, how do I put this?
Where are you exiting to?
I'm not leaving.
How do I get out of this? You're not gonna exit.
Linda, before we go there, I want to go there. I just want to add on to one thing that
Oh,
you
sure.
said. I told,
Okay.
we talked about the budget, and we talked about the $300,000 that we're going to get extra. And I need your financial expertise on this. But again, when we look at possibilities of growing the district and improving the revenue, there is potential to grow that revenue significantly. So I look back from my own personal experience in crunching the numbers for Hank, who is an exacting taskmaster, and I have to check every one of my numbers 10 times, and I have to give it to him, and he's gonna find the one number that might not be right, but, or he'll give me some perspective. But anyway, I crunched the numbers that from 2011 to the 2016 year, based on 5,000 per ADA, because I'm only going to give the most conservative number that I can to Hank, so that he doesn't pummel me too hard. Summit alone has brought into the district $730,000 from 2011 to 2016. And that's just with a handful of extra students, right? That was bringing us up from the 40 or the 50 to the 75 and the 78 students. And then I carried those numbers all the way through to the ones, because not everyone, I didn't count everyone who started, to the ones who did continue on through the upper grades and into Matilaha to come, and into the high school, and there were fewer of those, to come up with that figure. So I think that there is a substantial growth prospect just from my little tiny experience at one tiny little school in terms of district of choice opportunities.
Just, we've talked about that number as well, and I think it's a conservative estimate of what you've done, but I think that the way it combines years might still be a little bit misleading, because we're talking about the 730, which is conservative. I would actually say it's probably a little higher, but that's in a world of about $22 to $25 million budgets each year over that same 5 or 6 year span. So we're talking about, it was $730,000 out of $125 to $150 million in combined budgets. So we're talking about, it worked out because you combined years, and that's how you got to your 730.
For Ohio Unified.
Right, for Ohio Unified. So we're talking about I think you're talking about Santa Paula or District of Choice kiddos coming in, resulted in, if you look at the numbers that way, closer to, less than 1%, or maybe 3/4% or something like that would be the,
I'm
the
saying
fair analogy.
that small school with that small increase brought in $730,000 that the school district would not have had otherwise, at my very conservative estimate. So yeah, all those students had to be educated by the school district, but we're talking, not a big number. I don't think that small number even would have changed the staffing at Ohio Unified. I don't know that for a fact. But I'm telling you that from that one little school and that one little impact from District of Choice, I think it's significant. Now, correct me on my numbers.
Well, since you turned to me, Madam.
Well, we just talked about it so many
But
times.
first of all, you'd find it amazing that we actually have a great relationship, given the verbs that she chose, like pummeling.
Exactly.
That having been said,
You're not bad for overseeing.
that having been said, no, look, it was interesting how Andy put in context, the number of dollars in the budget. The fact here's some facts. It is absolutely true that if you were to take, go back 5 to 7 years, I'll just 7 years since I've been here, and take a look at the summit enrollment. Within the summit enrollment, the percentage represented by Santa Paula kids, there's no question that school has been impacted more by Santa Paula than Miramati and Miners Oaks has been impacted by Oakview. Okay? It's also true that we get way more kids from Oakview than we get from Santa Paula. So I think, and you brought this up at the table, really good points. And Chris keeps using the term, hypothesizing or theorizing. There's no way of knowing. Remember when I sat in that chair, I told you that if you bring together, for example, the populations of, just hypothetically, Miners Oaks and Miramati, and then some kids might have to go to Topa because there's not enough for either one of those two schools. If that's what you did, you'd have to hypothesize what would happen to the students who have been coming to Miramati and Miners Oaks from Oakview, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I also don't know what would happen if Summit were to close, how many fewer students we'd get from Santa Paula, but I'm sure we'd get fewer. Some fewer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
San Antonio would not be as big a draw if that's what happened as Summit is. So if you lost half, you'd be losing, in present conditions, 8 to 10. 8 to 10. Okay, we have 17 there, which is an extremely high number considering we have 38 total enrollment, right? But 17 could become 11, which could become 13. It varies tremendously by grade, by year. That figure 10 to 15 might be about a norm, except a few years ago when this fantastic enrollment push was made and we had 25 more kids come in from Santa Paula than we had the year before, and that carried over for a year and then it dissipated some, in part because of a decision I made to have 2 teachers instead of 3. So those are all factors. And because you have charts there that show you that we have a net, we've said this before, a net
more than 200 students coming into the district K-12 than going out. And about half of that or so, K-6. So it's a big part of who we are. Big part.
And I'm just wondering if it could even be bigger.
I don't think so. I really don't. And that we except in the conversations we've had at Summit, where if we did have 3 teachers there, right, I do believe you could draw some more students. Then there's a whole issue of equity, right? So if you have 3 teachers and you go from 38 to 55, and you have an average class size of 18, and in the rest of the school district, you have an average class size of 25 to 28, not equitable.
But we have a fabulous intra-district policy that they could come to Summit.
Well, but the evidence isn't there that they ever did.
And then why would we want to sacrifice tens of thousands of dollars for equity for just a handful of
that's
kids?
a-
I mean, I
that's
think
an
there's a
interesting-
great balance there. This is our ongoing.
We've talked about this for 7 years. So I think, the fact is that
That's a long humbling, you know.
we're debating.
With all the talk of bringing extra kids in, right now we've got about 120 students a day that are absent, right? Just right a
That's about right.
ballpark. If you can increase that, if you can get 10% of those kids that are absent to come back to school, that's an extra, $80,000 to the district right there. That's 1% of 120, or that's
10, right?
10% of 120 kids, so so if you can just cut that absent, I mean, if hypothetically, if you could figure out a way to drag that kid out of bed who doesn't want to come to school.
Isn't that solved through the Saturday schools? Couldn't we make a big push for
there's lots of things that you can do to increase.
Across the
Give
district?
prizes for
There's lots of things you can do that, but if you're talking about growing the ADA, let's work with what we have here in the Valley. Say,
That's a good
if you're
point.
not sick, come to school. And that's talking to parents. That's talking to community. And that all of a sudden, we're not getting an extra 10 students from Oakview or an extra 10 students from Santa Paula. We're getting the 10 students from right here where they're supposed to be. We just need to get their keisters in the chair.
And that's because of the ADA, is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
The Saturday
Everything
school is
Mark said's
another
correct.
tool to address that.
Yeah.
It's a punitive tool to address that.
What is that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
If you don't show up during the week, you have to show up on
But
Saturday?
so many of the schools make it super fun. Kids
Yeah, Mrs.
are
Dudder
desperate
has
to
been
go
really
to
good at
Saturday
making
school.
No, I'm okay. At a high,
Very
I'm thinking
attractive.
more of a high school level. in
No,
terms
no,
of more
right,
punitive.
no.
At an elementary level, you're right. We have attended Saturday schools, and it is a good way to recoup ADA. Mrs. Hoyt
But I
does
think you make an
programs with
excellent
dance,
point,
where her students get spend days at school on Saturday teaching dance camps. And I think our district benefits from ADA if they've got absences. It clears their absences.
I think it's really great that we look at the things that we can do to attract students, to differentiate our schools so that they are more attractive both for students and for young teachers, and that's the antithesis of closing schools. And so that, again, the concept of resilient schools is what I think that we should be having in Ojai Unified and building towards that. And, this whole thing where we've got a lot of information about what we can get from closing a school is not something that's going to be attracting people to our school district, I don't think. But if we have some kind of resilient schools policy, then that might be something that's attracting young new teachers who are dynamic and interested in environmental issues, for instance, which seems to be an important thing in our planet. So I really think it's important that that thing that you just brought up about getting absentee kids to come, and that generates funding right there. That's not about closing schools, right? That's about making more dynamic stuff going on at schools so that you're attracting kids to it. And that's where I think that we should be doing for a recommendation. And I think I started off with this when we started this committee, is that I don't think that we should be thinking of ourselves as a school closure committee. We are making recommendations to OUSD as to what to do with our elementary schools. And there's a lot of pressure on us to come up with a school closure idea. But I don't think that's what we're here for. That I think that we really need to look at alternatives
I
to
agree,
that.
David, but I don't think there's pressure. I think that's just one of the options we're discussing.
It's a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
It's a lot of information that's being presented that's
Yes.
about that.
Yes.
Well, ultimately, though, while I absolutely
Just
I
quantify.
love everything you're saying, David,
Right.
that, we have a lot of options as far as how we can make a recommendation, or we can just help encourage the district to explore different, opportunities to enhance our programs. the fundamental reason that a 7-Eleven committee exists and is convened is that it's a requirement by the state, and that's how it gets its name, is the number of committee members. They're all dictated by the state, and it's a precursor to making a decision about whether or not we have surplus property. So while we're not a school closure committee in the sense that we've already all come to a conclusion we have to close the school and really we have to decide which one, we are a committee that needs to look at, are we identifying surplus property, or are we going to say, no, we should stay exactly as we are, and there is no recommendation towards surplus property. But that is the underlying reason of why the Ed Code has told us to convene is the board wants a recommendation on, are we going to identify surplus property?
Well, and I think
In order to consider surplus property in its disposition, they have to have a 7-Eleven
Correct.
committee make recommendations for them to consider
Correct.
as we're a cross-representation of the community.
And why would the board be interested in recommendations on the possibility of there being surplus property?
It gives them the option of making a decision that does that. In order for them to have that option, not that they're leaning that way, not that they want to do it, but to give them that option, they have to convene a 7-Eleven committee to make recommendations and for us to receive the information we're receiving now.
And also, I think Measure J.
Yeah.
Measure J makes it
Prefaces.
important to look at the property specifically and question whether we should invest taxpayer dollars into a property to bring it back to life.
And it's full disclosure.
And we may come to the conclusion that absolutely we need to invest in each building because there's arguments for each facility's use. But I think it's important to look at it. When you're given taxpayer dollars, you have to look at the property and ask yourself, is this a
the
responsible
best
way
use
to
of the funds
spend
that
it?
we
Yes.
have.
So I think that takes us.
It's really a duty.
It's a duty,
To look at this.
absolutely, to
And
the tax-
the only way to exercise that duty is through the
Absolutely.
formation of such a committee. Because otherwise you foreclose the option of making that decision or even considering that option.
And that brings us to Linda's.
Hence the pressure of
point.
what the information we get.
So we had talked about possibly meeting every week in March, yeah.
So before we get to that, so next time, Wild and Wild are going to come and talk about values of properties.
And Regina Hirsch is going to come and talk about
And then-
leveraging Measure
That's
J
great.
Well,
against
let's talk about that. That's a potential for the agenda. Let's talk about that after the meeting, so I can understand exactly.
Well, why can't we
what
talk
that's
about it now? Because David brought it up at the last meeting, we talked
Right.
about it, and so I think it's something that we should talk about, whether it's going to be on the agenda or not, as a group.
Are you worried we won't
Sure.
have time?
We can make a motion to add to the agenda.
Quite honestly, I just need clarity on how that's relevant to us in our task as a 7-Eleven committee to understand making this designation for surplus
Well, we
properties.
talked about leveraging Measure J funds.
Well, it
which
sounds
is
more
why I
like a
think
Measure
it's-
J committee kind
But,
of.
so I already have an appointment lined up with her. We're meeting with her. We do have a Measure J committee that I do also think would probably be a better outlet or avenue for her to speak to.
To Measure J?
Yeah, because that's really what we're talking about, is how do we leverage additional funds, which is one of my, what I believe my greatest role is on the Measure J committee, is saying, how do we take advantage of SoCal Edison credits that might be available for energy enhancements? How do we look at, the potential of maybe some state dollars being available to us through a state bond if it passes in June? Looking at leveraging additional dollars, I think that is an incredibly important purpose, but I personally would recommend that not be part of the dialogue here, because it really is separate from our broader
Okay, except
discussion.
that our committee member brought it up and made all the contacts, and I would really like to hear it myself.
Can we attend? We can attend that meeting, yeah? We're not,
Measure J.
the Measure J meeting?
Right now, it's not open meetings. We don't publicize it. If you want to come, I'll tell you where it is. And it's a committee I described about an hour ago.
Right.
I think
It's a multi-constituency.
The key thing for me about the Measure J leverage is making the educational connection with it. So we do work on the exterior of the buildings, but the connection with that as a teaching tool, making that great standard-based educational value is the key for me to make a resilient school. So you have all this work that's going on. Hopefully that's going to be hydrating the landscape, trapping water, which we know is very important. Here we are, very little water, and that's a key to a resilient school. And so making, definitely I have an agenda about environmental magnet schools and using those Measure J funds and leveraging them and then tying that into standard-based lessons is a way to make a dynamic, resilient school that's going to attract teachers and students. So that's why I think it's relevant to our recommendations for OUSD. It might be that the actual funding leveraging process with Measure J is more appropriate for the Measure J committee, but the educational connection between what Measure J funds do on the buildings and what we do with education in the schools, that's the connection that I really want to foster. And I can talk about that as under a Resilient Schools heading, if you like, on the 25th.
I get very excited about the idea, and I'm looking forward to meeting her, and I personally actually very strongly support what you're advocating as well. I just have a difficult time knowing, one, if the purpose of the committee is not only, but the underlying purpose is to make a decision about, do we believe 5 schools is the correct configuration or something less, how that plays into that. Because I think that if we go to 4 schools, we could still have a resilient school program across those 4. Or if we are looking at how do we again leverage Measure J dollars with other funding sources. We know that the need is at least 100 million minimum, and that was again using Balfour Beatty's estimates to give us a ballpark. But we know that even reducing by a school or staying at the same school size, that we're going to have far in excess of any other leverage dollars available to us, utilizing some of the programs you've talked about, utilizing, if state money does become available, utilizing the credits that come through SoCal Edison and the gas company. And there's a number of different ways that we can have dollars go further, but none of those ways are ultimately going to get us to where we're going to meet all of our needs. So even if we reduce by 1 school, we'll still have sufficient need that doesn't close us off to any of the funding, additional funding sources. That's my perspective.
Still, I would like to hear.
I'm not going to weigh in on the subject. So you all decide, whether it should be on the agenda. I want to go back. I know it's after 9. I just want to say one thing about the genesis of this committee. Yes, it's true that, as Chris said eloquently, if you're going to be, or Andy, if you're going to be potentially disposing of property, then you have to have the committee. But that was not the genesis of the school board. The school board asked the question in March. Go back and look at the minutes of the meeting. The essential question is, and I think we're at a perfect point in the continuum of next year to the low point to 1,400 at the high point, this year at 1,325, right? The question is, what's the best way to house 1,325 students in grades K through 6? And all that you've worked on leads you toward the answer to that question. And you all have your opinions with all of the criteria. Mel and I have had these really cool dialogues, about, what criteria matter the most. And you wouldn't have been able to answer that question 4 months ago. Okay? But when you're done with this, that's the question. All criteria put on the table, what's the best way to house K through 6, 1,325 students? Present set of schools or something else. Okay? And yes, I agree that moving the 6th grade is an option, and if you want to put that in the report, you can, but it's part of the report. So maybe you'll say, well, maybe the best way to do it is to have 1,120 or 1,150 K through 5 students. If you want to, you can. But that's where it came from. That's where it came from. And then if you decided that the best way to do it was to have less than 5 school sites, then we needed to have a 7-11 committee, because you would be then setting aside one of those sites potentially, or 2, as a school site.
Yeah. Okay. So back to Dave's point, what's the thoughts on the committee? Mary Ann, you said...
I want to hear.
You want to hear
I want
the
to foreclose
presentation?
any discussion that our committee member thinks is relevant to our purpose.
I would certainly like to hear some more about resilient schools, because I think that gives us sort of one of the positive options. What is this? I do kind of agree that maybe the leveraging the funds might be for a different, under a different purview, but I would really be interested in hearing the resilient school idea. We could spend a little time on it. I would be interested in that.
Well, I want to hear the idea of the resilient school, so I kind of have an idea what you're talking about. And maybe to the extent that Regina can add to that, then I would vote for having it on the agenda. To the extent it does that, I understand, I agree that it's a Measure J matter, but if she can add to the discussion that you want to have, then I would support having her here.
Just, your ideas about growing the schools or making a kind of Yeah.
It's two different discussions, kind of, what Measure J
It's a different-
versus
yeah.
us, yeah.
It's a-
I would love, I get very excited about stuff like this, so, yeah.
This side of the table would like to have the rest of you. Any strong objections?
I'll vote for it.
I would tend to agree with
Because
Dan on
I
this.
certainly like to think about things, as we've discussed already, that would organically sort of grow the district. That was an interesting choice of words.
Okay, so I'll put that on the agenda for the next meeting.
Thank you.
And now beyond that, what is our exit strategy? How do we go about because unless you come back to me and say, hey, there's an area that we have not explored that I want to bring to the committee, I think we're at a point where we can deliberate.
So our process, and did you
Yeah,
thought about it, Linda? Because I have.
No, I actually have no idea. I was asking Glenn what the process would be.
And other people may have thought, I could just throw out my idea.
Throw out an idea, it's good.
So
Start
what I see is having at the next meeting or the subsequent meeting, I don't know which one is going to have enough time. It might be the one after the next one, where we know that we're going to come to the meeting and we're going to make our views known, just from what we're thinking. And it doesn't mean our set views, it doesn't mean our final recommendation, but what our ideas are. And then I'd like, some people to poke at them. Well, what about this, or what about,
Yeah, good.
I really want us to poke at our ideas. I don't think that we should, just because we don't know each other that well, that we shouldn't be polite. Obviously, we're all polite, civil people, but I think we should really poke hard at some of these ideas so that we can flesh them out thoroughly. So I like sort of to go around the table and sort of have a straw poll and then have a go at them. And then I would like, maybe, I don't know if we'll ever get to a consensus, but maybe there will be a consensus. And if there is one, then I would like some of us, not just one person, to write a recommendation. I don't know how you had foreseen or how other 7-Eleven committees have presented their recommendation. And then I would like a Supreme Court to have other opinions that people, disagreeing opinions.
Dissenting.
Yeah. That's just one idea.
I think that idea would lend itself really well to a ranking kind of system where if we can flesh out 4 or 5 different scenarios, and then through whatever reason, rank them 1 to 5.
5 like this idea and 3 like that idea.
Or
Okay, and then
even
that
like
narrows the conversation then.
even like they did when they did the committee for the middle school, they ranked them on a scale of 1. This was favorable for this aspect. This was favorable on a 1 to 10 scale or something like that. And every committee, the members were able to give kind of reasons to support their point of view on if they give it a 7.5 versus a 7.
So I see that discussion happening not on the next meeting, but the meeting following. Now, originally, I had proposed that we meet on the 14th and 28th of March, but I really am feeling like we're getting close to this point of deliberation, and I don't want to stretch this thing out. I'd hate to get halfway through deliberations and have to wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, good point.
So 2 options with that. One is that we meet weekly, which is an idea that I sent out, starting on the first.
Starting the 7th of
The
March.
7th would be, okay. And we could go later in the evening too. We could just dedicate a little bit of extra time because maybe we can get to the consensus that night. And then if we don't, that we meet again the following Thursday. And that we plan on doing weekly until we can come to a decision.
I wanted to ask a question, just a form question. Do we have to reach a consensus? Or
No, not at all. The report is the report.
Okay.
I was going to say one thing, I can't remember how I've sent you so much material, but one thing, Glenn, I could send out, just so you can sort of see how two committees, actually, one 7-Eleven committee and then another committee
Yeah, I saw.
formed its report. So the
Yeah.
two reports.
That would be great.
The 2 reports are the 7-Eleven committee that I did chair. For this, I guess I chaired both. For this one, for this property, right, which was that 9-to-1 vote to sell or lease all or part of the property. So you'll see that. And the second one was the middle school one, which had 20 members, and it has all kinds of opinions.
Yeah,
I mean, it was like 10, 15 pages of opinions.
Yeah.
Right, so you can read what everybody said.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it sort of coalesced around a 17-to-3 vote or so in order to move toward a middle school. But there were 2 very different ways of doing it, which I think, Mary Ann, we did a lot of poking. There was a lot of poking going on, particularly in this middle school one.
Well, because we have the luxury of time, and we have the luxury of a short association among ourselves. So I think that if we are, and we've gotten so much information, I think that maybe we'll come up with a consensus, but even if we don't, I don't know if we want to dilute it so much, but I think we should all have, those who want to, not everybody is going to have a dissenting or concurring opinion or additional thoughts, but I think that it would, I think as many of those well thought out, put on paper, organized responses to some proposals would be very beneficial to the school board.
I agree. Well said.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, you could literally have, sort of fiddling around with 5, 4, 2, whatever. You could have, you know, 4 different choices, sort of with 2 or 3 people.
Different
like
levels of support.
But you know what?
I'd rather not.
Well, no, but you know what? If that's where you end up, that's where you
You're right.
end up.
That's where,
Fine. I
exactly.
mean, that tells the board something.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, exactly.
So one point, just clarification. Were you suggesting that we would go around, state our opinion, and then people start poking, or we go around completely, everyone state it, and then we circle back?
What do you think is best?
I love the idea. I personally think it'd be better to go around to everyone first, so that way everyone has a chance to, you know, share, have an opening statement or opening position, and then we can begin to go back and kind of dive into, okay, well, you know, Chris, you said you really like this idea, but did you think about this, or how did this weigh into that? And, you know, then we could begin kind of that poke and prod.
Just so it's not like 12 Angry Men. I don't want to be Henry Ford.
I agree.
Henry
I'll bring all the, yeah, right. We'll save the pummeling all at once, right?
That, by the way, is my favorite movie.
Yeah, all right. You're not gonna lose that word, by the way. It's coming back to haunt you. I agree with Andy that everybody should have a statement, and then open the discussion, because otherwise you have no way of judging, of controlling the time on what people get and the attention. So I believe that we do the whole presentation, and then people can go back at any one of those things in a more free flow.
And then we have a clear idea of what, and then we'll go through each of those scenarios that have been proposed one by one. Are we going to go, so for example, Marianne, if you speak first, do we dig into your?
No. Andy just said to go
We
around.
go everybody, right?
List them all, and then circle back around and start
But
talking.
then my
And then
idea
we
is,
all pick on Mary.
my idea is that I might not even give the recommendation or the thoughts that I even have, but I want to just like throw out and flesh it out so that we can really be fleshing out a ton of ideas.
Okay. And the goal would then be to hopefully narrow down, and then come to.
Make it easier for the school board, because if we come up with 11 different options, right? I mean, really, the school board has the difficult job here.
They really do.
Yeah.
They
If
really
we give
do.
them that many choices, we haven't done our job.
Right, I think that's
I
right.
agree. I
think that's right. But I think
little
it's important,
hyperbole.
I think we should each bring, don't you think we should each bring what we really feel is like
That's
a
what I'm
good
bringing.
recommendation? Okay.
So you wouldn't be,
Subject to
But I might, but see, what I'm saying is I might be swayed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I
Subject to
see what you're
change.
saying, okay, right. But you're gonna bring to the table what you, yeah.
Where I am.
This is where I am right now.
Yeah, okay.
And,
Exactly.
you know, if I hear, and so that sets the parameters of the debate.
yeah. So
Okay.
you're thinking the 7th, we might be doing this
Yes.
thing, and then the 14th, we would be perhaps coming
You guys-
back at it?
Yeah, but you said you were not here
I
the 14th.
think we're off on dates, right? It's the 3rd and the 10th
Oh, is that
of
what it
March.
is? Yeah.
But we are saying so we're coming back February 25th
To discuss, to bring.
to have some
to bring
level
up
of
some-
information that Eric has put together. And then also to have the resilient school discussion. And then depending on time, we
Yeah.
also go into maybe the opening, you know, here's my view now, and then we start on March 3rd.
I would suggest, my suggestion would be that we wait till the March 3rd.
I'd like to
Start
digest
there.
what Eric and
Right.
Regina
or
put
me.
to us, yeah.
Okay.
I'd like some time if that's okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
So March 3rd and 10th. So
Yeah.
we would like
And
to see.
I just throw out the caution, I
can
really
be
want
on
all of,
Okay.
I really would like all of us to resist groupthink and not be bashful or not be bashful in any of our.
Haven't seen anybody back.
You could have the rules of to some extent of a brainstorming session. That is, that nobody's ideas are ridiculed.
Yeah.
And it encourages creative thinking about how we are. So if people feel like, you know, I'm saying this, I don't necessarily even know if this is a good idea, but I'm just throwing it out here. And I don't mean to throw out things willy-nilly, but you know, that does lead to people going, well, I never actually thought about that.
Yeah.
And they can actually change a whole perspective on
Right.
something
Sounds
that
good.
you come up in just in that free flow of ideas that are out there. So not completely uncontrolled brainstorming, but clearly, I think we should feel free to float ideas out.
Do we need any-
Talk about the good and bad aspects of any given idea without attaching that to any particular person's
Right.
character.
Right.
Do we need any
Yes.
whiteboards or markers or anything like that?
No,
Just-
we have that
The
thing there.
teacher.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
The teacher.
Would you brainstorm when I brainstorm?
Most likely you'll be the only one.
That's important.
PowerPoint
Yeah.
presentation.
I'll think about how to organize that. I'll give that a little bit more thought between now and then. Before we adjourn, we have the head groundskeeper for the district here. And did you want to comment? I know you were,
Yeah, I was gonna ask for public comment, but it's late enough, I'll join in on the third year. So that's fine.
you're wel- 2
It
weeks
would be
away.
great to have you for the 25th with Regina here if you.
I'll keep it short if you want to hear me out.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind.
Absolutely.
Short. I come to you, I really appreciate what's happening in this room. I've raised 6 kids through this school district, so I've been here a while, and I've seen some things. And I go to 1998, when the public put on to us about class size reduction, and that's where a lot of these portable rooms came from. And at that time, it was a big lease. And so the district looked at getting rid of the lease, making a purchase. In 1998, we already started declining enrollment. So what I appreciate is happening in this room is serious conversation and digging deep. I've raised my kids, and on my orbit, I'm almost done. I'm now at the point of grandkids, so I hope to still be with your district. So I wanted to put that into perspective because, as you pointed out, Miramani School, it has the most portables. Miramani School, with Measure J, will probably be the least because it has had the most. As far as plumbing, I can tell you a lot about this district that doesn't show up on numbers. And I also am the president for CSEA, and one of the things I do is to not look at the numbers, but to look at the process. And I'm really grateful to have worked with Hank all these years through some very difficult times, because it's about people, and he's kept it that way. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because we've also had some people here who have chased numbers, and those portable classrooms were forced upon the district because of class size reduction. And when you say these big, huge leases, we saw purchasing as a way out of that. So now we're looking at those buildings as possible liabilities. Well, I can tell you through some of my time with the district that I had options in this district. And as a parent, I'd hate to see you close your options. I can go to Ventura, they have mega schools. I can go to Oxnard, they have mega schools. We have here what the other districts don't have. And our 11% spec ed is an example of that. Okay. Laura, and with the charter school, was an option for one of my kids during a time when our valley went through a racial crisis. And so we had options. I don't want to see you give those options up. Money's money, and we have some people in this valley that believe in what's going on, and you were all an example of that. And so, yes, money's important, but I agree with what you said. I don't want to sell our options, okay? What you're doing with the gardens didn't exist. We have that option. The tower, well, the technology has just totally changed education. So these square footages have so much potential. But the idea of a tower versus fiber optics, we're there. Can we afford it? Probably not. Will somebody step up to the plate? Probably, because they believe in what's happening in this valley, and we see it every year. Okay, the amphitheater was mentioned. The potential. That started out with me in 10 yards of dirt over by the office because Topa had a mound, and the kids loved being outdoors and enjoying this environment. So we duplicated that at San Antonio, and then the service organization came in and says, we can do better than that. And they did a beautiful job. And it's not done, but it's the potential and the community involvement. So I understand the numbers, and I have to deal with the numbers. I was here with the $500,000 cut in labor before. It's painful. And I'm hearing those numbers again tonight. It's painful. but I also appreciate what's happening in that classroom. And like you said, people are coming here not for the money, but for what's here, and we're people. Okay, I'm raising children to always speak the truth. You guys are digging into the truth, as ugly as it looks. I get to dig in the dirt, the holes and everything, and it's really ugly. Okay? So I'll leave it at that. It's about people and not the numbers. So I would recommend, don't close anything, let's look for options. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, I'm sorry, can you say your name again?
Yes, Chuck Crawford.
Chuck Crawford, thank you so much.
All right, and with that, adjourned.